Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Layer Cake 2004 Movie Review. Layer Cake received positive reviews with an 81% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an average of, based on 142 reviews. The critical consensus states that it is a stylized, electric British crime thriller. On Metacritic, it has a weighted average score of 73 out of 100 based on 30 reviews. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times remarked, "The movie was directed by Matthew Vaughn, who produced Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, and this one works better than those films because it doesn't try so hard to be clever and tries harder to be menacing." Of Craig's performance, he said, "Craig is fascinating here as a criminal who is very smart and finds that it is not an advantage because while you might be able to figure out what another smart person is about to do, dumbos like the men he works for are likely to do anything." He gave the film 3.5 out of 4 stars. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle remarked on the efficient, gripping story and wrote that Craig's performance as an improvising, intelligent amateur contained the cool yet humble vibe of Steve McQueen. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly gave it a grade A, calling it a fast, convulsive, and densely exciting new British gangster thriller. Leslie Felperin of Variety wrote, "There's a proper lived-in believability about Layer Cake's depiction of how the worlds of the rich, the criminal and the criminally rich intersect. Once upon a time, long before irreverent Neil Gaiman adaptations, psychotic 12-year-old vigilantes and groovy X-Men movies set in the swinging 60s, Matthew Vaughn was Guy Ritchie's producer and helped him steer Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch and, swept away in front of cameras and onto screens. However, it seemed that Vaughn himself had quite the hankering to direct himself, and so in 2004, he attempted to break away from the stylish, hip, Guy Ritchie crime movie template in order to, well, create his own stylish, hip crime movie template in the form of Layer Cake. I have to be honest, British cinema at that time had been mercilessly lambasted with more gangster films than Martin Scorsese's filmography, and most of them were either Lock, Stock, rip-offs or the kind of violent thugathons that usually has everybody calling each other a slag, so my expectations for Layer Cake wasn't exactly high. However, little did I know that Vaughn had adjusted the recipe a little differently than his peers. Sov, disciplined, unnamed cocaine dealer, we'll just refer to him as XXXX, has a plan in place and intends to stick to it in order to secure a nice, healthy, early retirement. While he sells his white, powdery waters, he ensured that he sticks rigidly to his personal set of rules as to not jeopardize his business, his money and, of course, his life. However, crime bosses aren't usually known to sticking to the rules, as so one day, XXXX is summoned to have lunch with the mobbed-up Jimmy Price, who declares he has a couple of jobs for him. The first is that he has to track down Charlie, the drugged-up, runaway daughter of one of his more powerful associates, and the other is to oversee the sale of over 1 million ecstasy tablets that have procured in a very dodgy fashion by Wide Boy Wildcard, the Duke, a low-level criminal who runs around with his cadre of thugs like it's the Wild West. Needless to say, XXXX is highly resistant to stepping outside his comfort zone, but when a scary crime boss asks, a scary crime boss gets. Despite having his own crew to back him up that includes his enforcer, Morty, and his liaison with Jimmy, the fiercely loyal Gene, things turn to shit almost immediately. Firstly, XXXX finds out from his sources that Charlie isn't just missing, she's been kidnapped, and secondly, the ecstasy shipment brought in by the Duke haven't exactly been procured by honest means, as the nutcase simply jacked it at gunpoint from a gang of Serbian war criminals and have dropped his name into the mix. Running around and trying to furiously tie up loose ends while not getting murdered by a Serbian hitman known only as Dragan, XXXX eventually starts to see the sheer size of the hook he's dangling on after a visit with high-level crime lord Eddie Temple, who clues him up on the fact that his retirement may not be entirely forthcoming. To elaborate while doubling down on an earlier point, while I was fully a fan of the mockney gangster japes of Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, and Snatch, everything movie that subsequently tried to leap on the bandwagon usually got well and truly on my tits in no time at all. If it wasn't some cheeky, farcical comedy thriller that obnoxiously winked at the audience to a merciless degree, then it was the type of brutal hooligan movie that glamorized law-breaking anti-hero to an uncomfortable degree. However, Vaughn is far too savvy a filmmaker to fall into either one of those two traps, and instead made sure that Layer Cake was something that both contained style and substance along with the usual lineup of eccentric characters and rousing needle drops. Thus, much like the title denotes, Layer Cake proves to be a slick, complex, and, yes, layered affair that largely eschews broad, stereotypical caricatures and jokey situations in favor of something much more refined. Oh, the basic crime movie formula is certainly still there, as Vaughn and company do their damnedest to make their unnamed protagonist live a hugely desirable life as he surfs just out of reach of the more nastier criminal element. To be fair, it's not really that hard to make a lucrative criminal life seem seductive as a particularly attractive vampire, especially considering it comes complete with flash suits and an opportunity to sidle up to a fresh-faced Sienna Miller, but Vaughn does a noticeable more refined job than most, letting the reward speak for itself rather than indulging in an orgy of excess. Helping this immensely is a breakout performance from Daniel Craig who, after a career of memorable character roles in the likes of Munich and Road to Perdition, puts in an attention-demanding turn as the movie's unnamed protagonist. While throwing around the whole James Bond thing whenever Craig's name is mentioned is rather predictable, you can really see the beginnings of his journey to playing 007 here as he mixes super slick confidence with an air of vulnerability as his world flips like a pancake made of classic drugs. Simply put, alongside Vaughn's measured visuals, Craig is the movie and he commands the screen with a confident swagger. Everyone and everything else is gravy. There's early roles for impossibly young-looking, future thespians like an underused Tom Hardy, Ben Whishaw and an Uzi-waving Sally Hawkins. There's your usual Guy Ritchie/Matthew Vaughn regulars like Dexter Fletcher and Jason Fleming, and there's minted acting stalwarts like Kenneth Branagh, Colm Meaney and Michael Gambon filling out the cast nicely, and the brief but spirited spots of violence, soon to be a Vaughn speciality, are memorable, with a novel use for an iron being a particular standout. However, if there's a flaw in Layer Cake's planet, that it often ends up outsmarting itself when it comes to pushing through its gargantuan plot. While crime epics need, nay, deserve, sprawling casts, there's just too many moving parts here for the relatively short running time to effectively handle, and there's many a time when whole characters literally wander off screen to vanish for large chunks of screen time only to casually wander back. Also, Jamie Foreman's screaming, cap-wearing Duke literally feels like he's strutted in from Vaughn's Ritchie days, and while he's supposed to be at odds with the slick goings-on of the rest of the movie, it's too obvious a joke and you'd rather the film had given it to the younger actors like Hardy, Hawkins or Whishaw instead. Still, from its enticing opening to its brutal and sudden denouement, Layer Cake constantly justifies its existence in a very crowded market by being a twisty, turny treat. Maybe not top tier, but damn close. Like Scorsese's Casino and Goodfellas, the British crime movie Layer Cake opens with a narration describing a criminal world made in heaven. Also like Casino and Goodfellas, it is about an inexorable decline toward the torments of hell. The voice explaining everything to us belongs to Daniel Craig, who plays the competent and conservative middleman in a well-run London cocaine operation. Nobody ever calls him by name during the movie, and in the closing credits, he's referred to as XXXX, which may be one-upmanship on XXX, or probably not. Craig's credo, spelled out as if he's lecturing at a management seminar, involves knowing your suppliers, knowing your customers, paying your bills and never getting too greedy. His front is real estate. His exit plan is retirement in the near future. All of that changes when he is summoned to a private club for a luncheon meeting with his immediate superior, Jimmy Price, Kenneth Branagh, a hard man with cold eyes and a menacing Cockney charm. Jimmy wants him to sort out an ecstasy deal that went bad, and as a sort of twofer, also find the missing daughter of his boss, Eddie Temple, Michael Gambon, the kind of man whose soul has warts on its scars. XXXX does not much like either assignment. They involve cleaning up the kinds of messes he has scrupulously avoided in his own dealings. What's the use of playing it safe if you work for people who want you to take their chances for them? The ecstasy deal is especially dicey. One of Jimmy's cronies named Duke, Jamie Foreman, stole ecstasy pills allegedly worth £1 million. The Serbs he stole them from want them back. Jimmy's ideal scenario, never stated in so many words, would involve XXXX grabbing the pills for Jimmy while Duke is thrown to the Serbs. XXXX has some hard men who work for him and might be able to get this job done. More complicated is the matter of the girl, especially when another girl named Tammy, Sienna Miller, enters the picture. There are key supporting roles for such actors as the indispensable Colm Meaney, who looks as if he should be found guilty and sent down for life just for the way he has of listening to you. The movie was directed by Matthew Vaughn, who produced Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, and this one works better than those films because it doesn't try so hard to be clever and tries harder to be menacing. It's difficult to take danger seriously when it's packaged in fancy camera work, although Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock did have a carefree visual genius. Layer Cake is more in the Scorsese vein, in which a smart and ambitious young man has it all figured out and then gradually loses control to old-fashioned hoods who don't have the patience for prudence when it's easier to just eliminate anyone who gets in their way. The problem is that every dead enemy tends to have a more dangerous living enemy standing next in line. There is a kind of scene that both American and British crime movies do very well, in which low-lives enjoy high life. They've had success in their business of crime, but their preparation for life has not equipped them with interesting ways to stay amused. They almost always lack imagination about what constitutes fun, and dutifully spend their money on cars, cigars, women, champagne and memberships in private clubs, none of which finally seem to be worth the trouble. We are reminded of the last days of Scarface, a young man who desperately needed something constructive to do with his spare time. XXXX's dilemma is that he has the resources to enjoy himself, but works for people who speak a different language. He is really in the wrong line of work. He could steal more money with the kinds of high finance that distinguished Enron, and run a smaller risk of finding his head in a bucket of ice and his body elsewhere. As his life begins to heat up and events unfold more quickly than he can follow them, we're reminded of Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, whose life spins out of control. Daniel Craig was said to be the frontrunner for the next James Bond, until it began to be said that Pierce Brosnan might return for a farewell lap. My own money is on Clive Owen, but who would wish James Bond on anyone? Craig is fascinating here as a criminal who is very smart, and finds that is not an advantage because while you might be able to figure out what another smart person is about to do, dumbos like the men he works for are likely to do anything. Matthew Vaughn rode the post-Tarantino tsunami of indie crime cinema, and has leveraged it into a very industrious Hollywood career. Layer Cake, his debut film, stars a young Daniel Craig as an unnamed drug dealer who gets embroiled in a deal gone wrong. Vaughn brings some frothy fun to the proceeding, but it ultimately is a nondescript, bland effort aside from a handful of striking elements. The film's biggest strength is the breakout performance of Craig. He is ludicrously handsome and inviting, bringing some physicality and mystery to the role, perfect for the down-to-business character at the center of a storm. It provides a great template for the version of James Bond that he'd play. I'm not sure there are any direct sources confirming it, but it's widely understood that Layer Cake served as an audition tape for Casino Royale. The most direct antecedent to Layer Cake is Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, another English gangster film with slick stylization and a zippy pace, one that Vaughn produced and Guy Ritchie directed in 1998. It's been years since I've seen Lock, Stock, but you honestly could have convinced me that this was a Ritchie picture. The style is not as sharp here as in Ritchie's early films, with more emphasis on its neo-noir-esque plot than with flashy visual and dialogue style. Tarantino and Trainspotting descendants tend to be frothier than Layer Cake is. This slightly more serious tack hurts Layer Cake. It basically demands we take its characters and story seriously. The narrative is a bit convoluted, pulling beats from heist stories without the fun caper sweep of something like Ocean's 11. Only a few parts of the story really land. For example, I found Craig's affair with Tammy, Sienna Miller, a compelling conflict that I wish had more than 2 scenes to it, as it provides the crucial crack in Craig's business-only attitude. The plot centers around the theft of a huge cache of ecstasy pills that turn out to be nicked from a very powerful adversary, and Craig's attempt to recover the contraband. The story pulls in a huge cast of players, with lots of double-crossing and allegiance changes that mostly land with a fizzle. What works better than the script is the charisma of the cast. Craig, as mentioned, is outstanding, but he's not the only one. Tom Hardy has a small but memorable part, a slightly deranged Sally Hawkins lights up the screen like a slot machine, and Michael Gambon steals multiple scenes with some operatic line readings. The film ends with a wacky middle finger to the audience that would have created a much stronger impression had the movie figured out how to get us to care more about the fate of Craig's nameless protagonist than it does. As it plays, though, the final scene is a real head-scratcher that upends the otherwise breezy tone of the conclusion. Layer Cake is entertaining enough for the duration, but never quite makes a strong case for its existence. This problem, the big why, bothers me more in crime stories than other genres like comedies or interpersonal dramas. This is partially because of personal preference. I'd rather watch 2 people talk to each other for 90 minutes about not much than an uninteresting criminal botch a job, but I suspect most people are the opposite, but also because a baseline comedy and drama are built around characters, whereas a baseline crime story is built around scenario. I could read Wikipedia articles all day if I wanted to learn about stuff happening. Layer Cake doesn't have anything to buy into. It's all scenario, no heart. And so I can't recommend it even though it's modest fun for the duration. I'm not the biggest fan of Western crime cinema, but the UK niche is a welcome exception. There's something about the language/dialects and the general composure of British movie gangsters that makes them so much funnier and more likable than their US counterparts. It's no surprise then that I ended up liking Matthew Vaughn's Layer Cake the first time I watched it. That was ages ago though, and I hadn't seen the movie since, so it was time to give Vaughn's first another look. If you want to make it as a British director, there are worse ways than to start your venture into directing with a gangster/drug comedy. It did wonders for Danny Boyle. Guy Ritchie even built his entire career on it. It's not a guarantee to success, of course, but if you have the chops, then you're pretty much set for life. I must admit that Vaughn's first feature film isn't quite up there with its illustrious predecessors, but it's still a very capable gangster film that aptly combines comedy and crime elements. Layer Cake is based on a novel by the same name, but I don't think it matters all that much. The plot of the film is pretty basic, nothing you haven't seen before in other crime flicks. This is a film that typically hinges on the skills of its director. It's a good thing then that Vaughn was eager to prove his worth. As plain as the story is, Vaughn works hard to turn every scene in something special, and for the larger part he succeeds. There is hardly a dull moment, and even the simplest narrative scenes are turned into stylistic highlights. The plot revolves around an unnamed criminal somewhere halfway up the ladder. He gets his assignments from the rich and powerful drug lords above him, but leaves the dirty work to others. Our mysterious hero is pretty successful and smart, planning to leave to the business once he has saved up enough of a fortune to live out the rest of his life in peace. But right when he wants to step out, he is summoned by his superior for one last job. A shady deal with some low-life thugs who want to get rid of a shipment of ecstasy pills. It smells like trouble, and of course that's exactly what we're getting. A film like Layer Cake benefits from looking stylish. Luckily Vaughn has visual flair to spare. The camera work is slick, the editing is sharp and well-paced, while the color palette is somewhat muted, but without ever looking dulled or lifeless. Overall the film looks pretty great, but Vaughn picks out a few scenes to spice things up even more. The diner scene in particular, with a possible nod to Avalon, stands out as prime cinematic pleasure. It's moments like these when the film sets itself apart from its peers. The soundtrack is pretty nifty too. Not the most inspired or original choice of pop music, but it's tailored to perfection. These kinds of pop soundtracks rarely pan out well, but Layer Cake is a notable exception. It's the perfect example of how you can have a rather plain selection of tracks and still make it work for your film. The result is often surprising, bringing something extra to the scenes, which in turn makes them stand out even more. Together with the visuals, the music makes for a fine audio-visual experience. Daniel Craig is perfectly cast as the nameless criminal. He has composure, class, but he's also slick and sneaky enough to play the part of the elevated gangster. The rest of the cast is filled with familiar faces, but mostly actors who tend to excel in supporting roles. People like Colm Meaney, Michael Gambon, and Jason Fleming. Some younger faces too, like Ben Whishaw and Tom Hardy, who were both still on their way up while making this film. All in all, a very talented, though expected cast who know how to deliver. Structurally, this is a pretty basic film. A drug deal goes wrong, things get messy by the minute, and in the end the heroes, or at least, the criminals who we sympathize with, make a final move in the hope of coming out winning. It's a familiar setup, and Layer Cake does little to deviate from it. If you expect anything more than a solid genre flick, you'll probably be disappointed by this film. Then again, Vaughn doesn't pretend to reinvent this genre, instead he tries to make the best of a bunch of familiar elements. Layer Cake is a film for people who are already fan of British crime comedies and who are looking for their next fix. It's nothing too out of the ordinary or divisive, it's just really well-made genre cinema. It looks stylish, boasts a fun soundtrack, and delivers a quirky range of gangsters, ticking all the boxes that makes this niche great. A fine blend of crime and comedy, nothing more, nothing less. If that's your thing, then this is an easy recommend. If not, there's probably very little here for you. There is something about British gangster movies that make them not only great pieces of cinema, but also a romping, fun and entertaining ride. Layer Cake is no exception. Although the movie first came out in 2004, I recently rewatched it and thought it was worth a review since it's definitely a must-watch. So if you haven't seen it, you just have to. Yes! The movie is that good. The story is told through the perspective of Daniel Craig, credited as XXXX at the end title sequence, who plays a middleman for major drug deals happening in the heart of London. Business is in the up and up and things are going great for him. A natural smooth operator, he manages his business safely and intelligently, and as he puts it, always have a plan and stick with it. His plan, of course, is to retire early and enjoy the spoils of his labor, and as you may guess, things don't really go according to plan. Let's just say that by the first half an hour of the movie he ends up having a murdering psychopath, the Serbian mob, and some major drug lords in London after him. Not to mention the sexy and gorgeous Tammy, Sienna Miller, who ends up his love interest in the story. The movie is about how Craig's character uses his wits and outsmarts everyone and resolves all of these complications so that he can retire in peace. The plot sounds pretty straightforward, but I guarantee twists and turns, and the movie unfolds just like a novel does, which is one reason why Layer Cake is such a great movie. This is not surprising considering the fact that Layer Cake is based on the novel of the same name by the author J. Connolly. Nevertheless, much credit is owed to director Matthew Vaughn for successfully recreating that feeling of reading a good crime novel on screen. One of the strengths of the movie is also how well it has been stylized, and how that doesn't reduce from the content of the story or its message, but only adds to make an overall package that is just a thrill to watch. Layer Cake boasts brilliant performances from a great cast ranging from Daniel Craig to Colm Meaney, Sienna Miller, Michael Gambon, and a very young Tom Hardy. The movie has excellent character development backed up by solid performances delivered by these actors, which is one of the movie's many strong points. Layer Cake also doesn't fall short of providing a pretty meaningful message: quit while you're ahead and don't leave any loose ends, which I must say, is pretty solid advice in general, especially if you're planning on going into the drug business. The formula comes off the peg: Cockney villains, with Scouse backup, language is effin' everything, goods are drugs and birds don't feature much, except for a foul-mouthed bin and a sexy blonde in black lace undies. The story's bollocks, incomprehensible bollocks. Honor amongst thieves? Don't be bloody silly. The latest piece of gangland roughage is suitably violent, with a who gives a monkey's attitude. Daniel Craig ponces about in well-cut suits, or pressed jeans, looking dangerously cool as the dealer who has it all sussed until some jerk called Duke, Jamie Foreman, sticks him in it with a Serbian mob from Amsterdam. Well, ever heard of pear-shaped? Listen and learn, my son. When Duke shows up with £1 million worth of happy pills, stolen at Uzi Point from Dragan, a Balkan hard man, who specializes in leaving his enemies headless, the London mob had better wipe that smile off their ugly mugs. The only thing missing in Matthew Vaughn's debut is Ray Winstone. Instead, you have Craig playing Winstone, Graham Cranham playing himself, Michael Gambon playing Richard Harris, with an assortment of eccentric support staff. No one can be trusted. When money's involved, expect ketchup on the pizza, only this isn't a mafia movie, it's a homegrown robbers and robbers shoot 'em up. Financed by Columbia Pictures, Layer Cake is a Hollywood repro. If you have to kill someone, Colm Meaney says, never, ever, tell a living soul. He does, of course. Otherwise, where's the story? Drugs, paranoia, double cross, no cops, surprisingly. It's all in the mix. What, you may well ask, is new? Don't spoil the party. Sit back and be battered into submission. For a film that is supposed to be in the stock tradition, there is no humor. The narrative voiceover gives it literary gloss, as if language can plug the holes in the plot. Layer Cake is a slick, smart, and darkly funny noir that launched the careers of both star Daniel Craig and director Matthew Vaughn. The plot sees Craig as a successful London drug dealer facing a series of escalating challenges on the eve of his early retirement. Though Vaughn's film echoes many of Guy Ritchie's stylistic touches, J. Connolly's script is more akin to Louis Mellis and David Sinto's script for Jonathan Glazer's Sexy Beast, resulting in a film that's flashier than Glazer's, but more resonant than Ritchie's. A happy medium. For a first-time director, Vaughn acquits himself very well. Though there's a bit of fat evident here and there, the film is mostly lean, and moves through its story at a good pace. Kudos to Vaughn also, for delivering a near-perfect ending that ties the whole film together in a surprising, but wholly satisfying manner. Finally, there's Daniel Craig, who's great as the unnamed lead. Though he didn't know it at the time, Craig was essentially auditioning for the soon-to-be-vacant role of James Bond, as his suave, ultra-cool performance here isn't that far removed from his turn as the super spy. A wimpish, pre-Bond Daniel Craig turns in a magnificent performance as the nameless drug-dealing anti-hero of Matthew Vaughn's exquisitely crafted and scripted brick gangster flick, Layer Cake. Deconstructing the nasty scumbag conventions of such a character, Craig imbues Mr. X, as he is billed, with immense everyman charm, a double helping of whammy, persecution, and enough street smart, think on your toes savvy to give the genre a clever and energetic smack round the chops. Figuring that he has just one more big deal to clinch and then be able to retire to a life of luxury, X is reluctant to take on board an off-kilter last job for his boss to locate his missing daughter, a task that will mean calling in favors from numerous lowlifes and jettisoning the safety bubble that has, so far, cushioned his dodgy lifestyle. But what seems like a simple enough mission becomes a disaster of monumental proportions as unlooked-for complications conspire to drag him down to the lowest rung of the criminal ladder and bring him into contact with types far more dangerous than his usual clientele. The tale, adapted by screenwriter J.J. Connolly from his own novel, is justifiably convoluted and full of differing plot strands and myriad motivations that will all conspire to collide, confuse and coalesce, whilst simultaneously unraveling and pulling the rug out from under you. This is the sort of story that demands you pay attention, not because it will help you decipher the underhanded underworld that it coils itself around and exploits, but because there are so many delicious vignettes and situations that Mr. X and his motley band of associates find themselves in that a wayward mind could easily miss some canny contrivance or snappy twist. Very much of the Guy Ritchie ilk of modern urban gangsterism, everybody is a baddie, of sorts, and double or triple crossing is the accepted vogue. The story is a blend of the hard-hitting and the rib-tickling. Headhunting nutters are upstaged by mobile phone sarcasm, scouse drug dealers, familiar faces from Brookside Lewis Emmerich and Stephen Walters, use gesticulations and jargon like weapons, Cockney-wide boys make plastic threats and dress like Del Boy on an extremely bad day, a warehouse stakeout becomes a Keystone Cops homage, lauded thespians turn malicious and, throughout it all, carving his persona with a mellifluous voice of unknown accent, and a demeanor that can flick from fierce calm to think whilst you panic desperation. Daniel Craig walks tall and supreme, grounding the film with a cerebral yet theatrical foundation. As is becoming customary, Craig again brings intensity to the role. Intelligent and confident in his dealings, he seems to have an answer, or a backup policy for any eventuality. He knows his place in the grand scheme of things and is not too arrogant to forget just how precarious his seat of power really is. People that shouldn't be crossed depend on him and, as finite and professional as he is with his shady trade, events can still spiral out of control if some eager and greedy hands take a chance and dive into the pot. Such is the deadly predicament he finds himself in when a huge consignment of pills go missing and his hallmarks are all over the deal. Pretty soon, a Serbian hitman called Dragan, rival gangs, a clinically tenacious overseer, the great Michael Gambon, a chaotically off-the-rails mobster, the equally great Kenneth Cranham, and his own desperate buddies are going to have Mr. X over a barrel. It seems everybody wants a piece of him, and that carefully planned early retirement he so dreamed of looks like crumbling to dust before his very eyes. To elaborate further on the plot would be a grave disservice to what is one of the finest thrillers Britain has produced in recent years. Witty, exciting and shot through with an ominous sense of dark, sliding menace, Layer Cake packs a punch as emotional as it is visceral. That it also engages the brain is another ace up its already crowded sleeve. As events tumble towards their finale, it is hard not become excited by what Hannibal Smith from the A-Team would no doubt describe as a plan coming together, but each scalpel-sharp trick that the script plays, the film ducking and weaving with a devious dexterity that must have been both a gas and a curse to construct, still leaves us on edge and unsure as to exactly who is going to come out on top. Fast and conversational, the relationships between all these eclectic characters are verbal campaigns of bluff and deceit, tall talk and whining excuses. There is only one poker face amongst the lot of them and, when the dust settles, the ultimate payoff is both soul-destroying and yet elevating at the same time. Clever stuff. As viewers, we are just as manipulated as our main man, his minor victories along the way shared by us, his tension and anxieties acutely experienced by proxy, too. Films such as this have taught to trust absolutely no one, but it is hard not to empathize with X's maddening plight. Like the tragic Carlito Briganti in De Palma's superb Carlito's Way, which this film pays homage in more ways than one, X is a bad guy who just wants to make enough money to go straight and be legit. We know that to him it is just business, he doesn't want to hurt anyone, but circumstances, and associates, won't let him off the hook. When you are in too deep, your choices are limited and, therefore, your actions, however well-intentioned, will become drastic and self-destructive. With stalwart support from a vibrant cast that includes the supremely sensual Sienna Miller as party girl Tammy, who just has the hots for Mr. X, the sexty's phone call is guaranteed to catch the breath of any male viewer, let alone the hot-to-trot Craig, the excellent George Harris as X's staunch, yet troubled second-in-command Morty, and Dexter Fletcher's duplicitous Ben Copper, the film would have been strong enough. But when Michael Gambon's sharp-suited and psychologically incisive crime kingpin, Eddie Temple, lays down the law, with that superlative diction and eerily nonchalant air of his, he asserts total and convincing dominance over his nefarious realm. Nothing could faze this guy, and his studied politeness only barely masks a rich and potent vein of obsessional malice. By contrast, Kenneth, forever Harvey Moon, Cranham's gullible gangster's love of status, wealth and power is a front to his innate insecurities, his burst blood vein tantrums adding immense pressure to an already volatile performance as Jimmy Price. Colm Meaney proves his worth as a firm and dependable confederate to X, though in one of the script's many great quirks can prove to be just as dangerous to our hero as the terrifying, death-dealing Dragon. Craig's dislike of guns is a great piece of incidental character play when you consider who he would later go on to portray with such ballistic vigor. The scene when Colm Meaney's Gene opens a cabinet to show off his collection of firearms and X, initially revolted by the sight of them, becomes transfixed by a German Luger and then play-acts stealthily around the room in pure Bondian parody is an absolute hoot. The aftermath of his enforced use of the gun is the exact opposite of this childlike excitement, however, with Craig's character reduced to a whiskey and pill-chasing, soul-blighted wreck. Matthew Vaughn, having learned so much from his time with Guy Ritchie on Lock, Stock and Snatch, keeps a dark but delicious edge to such scenes, spiking the effortlessly sublime and involving atmosphere with moments that are shocking, impactful and blisteringly wry. Past events will have repercussions on the direction the characters are heading in, and arrangements made in the present are sure to bounce back with a vengeance as the story unfolds. When death comes to layer cake, it is violent but necessary, and understandable, too. The cafe beating is utterly horrible, yet even here there is a valid reason behind the head stomping and the face scalding, lending the film a prevailing unpredictability that makes every confrontation icily tense. Despite many comic interludes, there is a deep threat to the proceedings that cannot fail to keep you on your toes. We get to know these people and we like them. They are, indeed, fun to hang around with. But it would have been a mistake to leave out the risky and intimidating nature of their world, and it is rare film, indeed, that can mix intense character study, intricate narrative, witty wordplay and pulverizing mayhem into such smooth, rich texture. Scorsese did it with Goodfellas, the Coen brothers did it with the simply awesome Miller's Crossing, though, of course, the Brits did it first with John Mackenzie's The Long Good Friday. You're a bright young man, this monkey business is in your blood. You're not getting out, you're just getting in. No matter how complicated things get, the screenplay still manages to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. It may be gritty in places and deal with a lot of unsavory people and situations, but Layer Cake is still basically a farce, a series of mishaps and misunderstandings that all come together to create one big, chaotic jumble of dilemmas. Its charm, however, is strung into one continuous loop by Daniel Craig. The man is a powerhouse of reined-in charisma and, alongside his turns in Road to Perdition and Enduring Love, it is no surprise that he landed the part of James Bond. Even here, when the noose tightens around his neck and things Mr. X has no control over, or even comprehension of, close in on him, Craig finds order and serenity amidst the escalating danger. His conversations with Dragon are priceless, the best being the first and most abrupt one, when he simply asks the assassin if he knows his address and when Dragon doesn't, tells him to F off. His effortless manipulating of the Duke's nephew, Sidney, is so understated that you may not even realize what he is doing. But there is a ruthless vulnerability to him as well, that has us genuinely pleased that he seems to get the girl and then genuinely heartbroken and shell-shocked when he ends up dangling over the edge of a roof instead of dangling over the duvet with her. Bond's furious fist and foot salvos wouldn't have gone amiss either, as Mr. X, similar to Gabriel Byrne's Tommy Reagan in Miller's Crossing, seems to be forever on the wrong end of a beating. Vaughn's style of filmmaking is refreshingly skewed away from Guy Ritchie's, despite the usual lock, stock and snatch comparisons being made. Layer Cake, in actual fact, has little in common with the two prior British mobster flicks, striking its own path through the scheming, double-crossing treacherous quagmire of organized crime. Visually, the film is very slick and dynamic. Excellent photography takes in the most diverse and unflashy of settings and locations, yet paints them all with atmospheric lighting and moody angles that can often remain impassive and observant, yet at other times, pitch you in with shocking immediacy. London looks amazing, shot through with mean blues and greens and a wide aspect. Expansive locations, such as warehouses, the clubhouse or Eddie's mansion, supply room for the film to breathe. Whilst up north, we get a squalid flat and a bridge overlooking a motorway. But the film always looks vital and engrossing, perfectly matching the tight script and the terrific performances. An excellent thriller, folks, and one that I recommend very highly indeed, but don't be fooled by that Bondian cover shot of Craig on the package. He is most certainly not rehearsing for 007 duties with Layer Cake. Films like this make me happy I can afford to pay for them because Layer Cake is worth the money in the end. Taking off with a very Guy Ritchie sensibility, director Matthew Vaughn, who has had involvement with one of my favorite films of the past year's Snatch, creates his own stylish monster of a mob movie with Layer Cake. What does the title refer to? Well, that's basically something left for the climax, but this rampage of sex, booze, drugs, and violence make this one of the best mob movies I've seen since Snatch. Mr. X is a drug dealer/drug maker who wants to grab life by the balls. He makes the drugs, sells them, and makes out easy. But his latest customer requires some actual action and wants him to retrieve his daughter who has lost it in the underworld of drugs. Now Mr. X must halt his grand plan of making money and getting off scot-free and get his hands dirty. What I found so utterly genuine about Vaughn's mafia thriller is the main character. He's young, cocky, and so sure of himself he goes by the name of only Mr. X, and not even the audience knows his name. No sooner than being introduced to Mr. X do we basically veer into a very elaborate tale of murder, drugs, and murder, with the occasional glimpse of Sienna Miller, who is gorgeous as a distraction for Mr. X during his turmoils. Vaughn is just a great director, seamlessly creating his own visual style while borrowing some style from his former partner Guy Ritchie, which the constant cuts back and forth between subplots that create an appropriate fresh aesthetic atmosphere that is always moving within the elaborate story. There is so much going on during the film that it's sometimes difficult to keep up with what's going on, which keeps us on our toes as Mr. X must be. Layer Cake manages to give the audience an excellent story which peeks inside the ingenuous undertakings of the mob world. Much of the colloquialisms given during the conversations that the mobsters have are inside lingo that often alienates the audience yet involves us as if we're being given a first-hand peek into what is going on. Deep down we know they're discussing something truly pivotal. Daniel Craig poses a sort of McQueen quality, giving an excellent performance that is mostly comprised of brooding, and his intensity as Mr. X really carries the film with the proper artistic distinction required for the leading role of this great film. Aside from Craig, we're given an array of colorful characters that make up the mob world, including an excellent performance from George Harris, who is intense and menacing as Mr. X-assigned sidekick Morty. He stands by him and protects him but immediately turns on him at the suspicion of any wrongdoings. Not to mention there's the often funny and very sexy Sienna Miller, who plays the femme fatale Tammy. The one caveat of Layer Cake is the story, which at times was so elaborate and so busy that I honestly had a hard time keeping up with it. Normally, I don't mind films that demand my attention from beginning to end, but many times, Layer Cake was just too complicated to really decipher up until the climax, which basically managed to resolve certain questions that I posed during my viewing. Much of what happens and isn't really explained until much later on, which the audience may find stressing as I did, and I just couldn't follow it many times. There are many twists and turns during the plot, courtesy of the original novelist Connolly, who tugs the audience back and forth with an assortment of unexpected twists, including the surprise ending which will drop you to the ground, but it's Vaughn's sick way of playing one final joke on the audience, such as the films he engaged in with Ritchie. The one main flaw of the film is the sometimes difficult story, which took some extra attention. Excellent acting saves the day, as well as Vaughn's direction. Guy Ritchie's visual style rubs off on Vaughn, who creates an excellent opus in the drug world and throws us for a loop with a heavyweight gangster picture worthy of being included in with the greats. Having produced a few Guy Ritchie movies, Matthew Vaughn reckoned he could do as good a job himself with London gangster flick Layer Cake. Critics inevitably compared the two filmmakers, tagging this stock without the laughs, but Vaughn isn't worried since scoring a BAFTA nomination for Most Promising Newcomer. This also marks yet another standout performance by Daniel Craig, whose only rival in the contest for most movie appearances of 2004 was Jude Law. A promotional featurette reveals that Layer Cake is a metaphor for the many echelons of underworld society, but with only 5 minutes to sell the movie, interviews with cast and crew are reduced to mere sound bites. Thankfully, the National Film Theatre's Q&A session with Matthew Vaughn and Daniel Craig is a much more insightful investigation into the filmmaking process. Vaughn points out that he deliberately excluded the funny bits to avoid comparisons with Guy Ritchie, shame about that, and aimed for the lush visuals of Michael Mann's Heat rather than the kitchen sink aesthetic usually associated with British films. By the end of filming, he says, I felt like I'd found my vocation, while Craig sums up his experience, saying, I felt satisfied and knackered. Vaughn goes into scene-specific detail about his creative choices in a feature commentary with writer J.J. Connolly, who also wrote the book on which the film is based. Both men, but particularly Connolly, are very softly spoken, so it's occasionally difficult to decipher what's being said. However, if you train your ear to it, there's some interesting stuff here. For instance, the part of Sydney was rewritten for actor Ben Whishaw, who was initially deemed too young and too skinny to make a believable tough guy. Vaughn is pretty pleased with himself for looking beyond the physical traits. Nonetheless, Connolly wasn't happy about having to make the changes. I'm not saying it was a masterstroke, he tells Vaughn, you just lucked out. The duo also provides commentary for 13 deleted scenes, including 2 alternate endings that Vaughn says Sony forced us to shoot. Of course, they're a different shade of rosy than what exists in the final cut. On the whole, these scenes are mostly expositional, except for one wryly amusing vignette that's sort of like Goodfellas meets the royal family. Storyboard and photo galleries plus the hailing music video by FC Kahuna complete this modest selection of features. You might expect more from a 2-disc package, still Layer Cake offers just enough to sink your teeth into. If you're a fan of the British gangster flicks Guy Ritchie used to make, and were saddened when he detoured into making crappy remakes starring his wife, then you should enjoy the directorial debut by the guy who produced all of Ritchie's flicks, including the crappy one, Matthew Vaughn. Layer Cake is another Brit gangster flick in the same vein as those of Ritchie, and all the other stylish criminal tales with unending complications, colorful villains that speak in noir and have fun nicknames like Duke and Crazy Larry, suave and intelligent main characters who dress and accessorize as though they're in an editorial spread in GQ while drinking hard liquor and philosophizing on their role in life via narration, and incredibly hot chicks who fall for their squinty stares. That have come out since Stock caught people's attention. It's nothing we haven't seen before, a crime thriller that serves as wish fulfillment for the dudes in the audience thinking that if they were a drug dealer, they'd also be that cool. However, what the film lacks in originality, it makes up in style. Of course, its over-stylized nature and convoluted intertwined plots themselves have become cliché, as they're par for the course for this type of movie, which itself is one of the biggest clichés, the story of a criminal looking for one last big score before giving it all up for good. Vaughn exhibits a real eye for setting up iconic shots, infusing the picture with atmosphere, style, and interesting transitions. It is easy to buy Daniel Craig as the suave, coolly efficient main character, as Vaughn shoots him the whole movie with a Steve McQueen vibe. Throughout the movie, Vaughn eschews Ritchie's more gritty and comedic flair to project slickness. It's all very seductive, creating an eminently watchable genre flick. Even if you don't quite understand what you're watching at times, it remains enjoyable to watch based on how Vaughn sets up his shots. Unfortunately, Vaughn's creative direction is both a highlight and a detriment of the film. While clearly an exercise in style, in a positive, entertaining sense, Vaughn gets a little too showy with his techniques throughout the movie. Jamming it full of CGI-assisted transitions and flashy shots like looking up through a glass table at our characters. At times, it feels less like a story, and more like Vaughn's resume piece. The plot holds intrigue and keeps things moving, but as with Vaughn's techniques, it probably twists on itself and complicates matters a bit too much, coming off as unnecessarily dense in a possible attempt to cover up the fact that we've seen all these situations in other movies. Ultimately, despite its flaws, Layer Cake is still a very entertaining movie that fans of the genre should easily embrace. The supporting cast are all fantastic in their roles, the dialogue is snappy, and the suspense is effective. Newcomer Matthew Vaughn has managed to take a standard-issue brick gangster flick and fashion a taut and entertaining 105 minutes that signal him a filmmaker to watch in the future. Layer Cake was Matthew Vaughn's first movie. Before then he produced some of Guy Ritchie's movies. It was very well received and put him on the map as a director to watch, with him very nearly directing the third X-Men movie afterwards. Although I saw it already years ago, I wanted to check it out again, since I was already re-watching some of Matthew Vaughn's movies recently. It's even better than what I remembered it being from my first viewing. Layer Cake is written by J.J. Connolly, adapting his book of the same name for the big screen. It's a pretty standard British crime thriller, albeit a very good one with some twists and turns. One could compare this to Guy Ritchie's crime movies, especially seeing as how Vaughn was involved with Ritchie's early movies. Although there are some similarities, there are plenty of distinct differences between them, especially when it comes to the tone. Vaughn's other R-rated movies generally has a lot of dark comedy to it. Layer Cake on the other hand is more serious, more like a crime thriller, and doesn't have as much comedy. It for sure has some brief dark comedy at points, however. It's actually pretty riveting over the hour and 45 minutes runtime. I think the main reason that this all works really well together though is because of the lead character, which I'll get into in a bit. As good as a bunch of all this is, Layer Cake wouldn't have been as great without Daniel Craig, who honestly makes this movie. Craig is outstanding as the unnamed lead character, not exactly sure why his name is never revealed, who in this movie is more of a businessman than a gangster. In fact, he hates gangsters and violence. He also shows a very wide range of emotions as he's thrown into so many situations that he's struggling to keep alive in, and through his performance you can really root for the lead character. You can definitely tell why Daniel Craig was picked for James Bond. There's a lot of Bond that you can see in his performance here. One of Craig's best, if not his best performance. The rest of the cast also played their parts really well. The rest of the cast including Colm Meaney, George Harris, Michael Gambon, Tom Hardy, Ben Whishaw and Sienna Miller all play their roles very well. Gambon in particular was great as a ruthless and villainous sort of character, quite different from other roles that he's had. For a debut, Matthew Vaughn did a great job. It doesn't look like his first movie at all. It's all filmed and edited very well. The music choices were also perfect. He's got a real great handle over the whole movie. Layer Cake is an outstanding directorial debut from Matthew Vaughn, a well-written and directed crime thriller, with Daniel Craig's great lead performance really making the movie. It's an underrated little flick that definitely deserves a lot more praise and really worth a watch if you haven't seen it already. Sometimes you find yourself watching a crime caper film that tries too hard at acting hip that it becomes ridiculously bad. Matthew Vaughn did a good job at keeping Layer Cake from crossing that line and brings forward an entertaining film about the English drug world. Daniel Craig does a brilliant job in the leading role and is supported by an interesting cast of characters. The movie does have its weaknesses, but they're generally forgettable. Layer Cake is a joy to watch from beginning to end. Daniel Craig's character, who remains nameless throughout the entire movie, is looking to end his career as a cocaine distributor. He's already worked out his retirement plan and wants to get out as soon as possible. He's asked by his boss Jimmy Price, Kenneth Cranham, to track down Charlie, the teenage daughter of Price's business partner Eddie Temple, Michael Gambon, who appears to be in some trouble. Although it seems like a weird request by Price considering that Craig's character's line of work involves drug distribution and not finding people, it seems like an easy job for Craig's character. However, things quickly turn ugly for Craig's character. While also doing a job for Price that involves picking up 1 million ecstasy pills from a gangster with a wild side named Duke, Jamie Foreman, things go south. Soon, Craig's character is being threatened by a powerful Serbian gang that originally owned the pills until Duke's group stole it from them. Under the belief that Craig's character is the mastermind of the heist, the Serbian gang puts pressure on Craig's character to surrender the pills. As well, Charlie's disappearance makes this issue even more convoluted. Along with help from his partner Morty, George Harris, and Price's right-hand man, Gene, Colm Meaney, Craig's character tries to figure his way out of this weird situation and retire from this culture once and for all. The movie tries to act cool and does a good job at it, but there are some lame parts though. The fact that the main character of the movie, Craig, has no name feels absurd and smacks of trying too hard. It's kind of silly seeing XXXX pop up during the closing credits as a character's name. Another flimsy part of the movie is that the Duke's group of idiots are so stupid that how they managed to outsmart the Serbian gang is almost nonsensical. Also, the character Tammy, Sienna Miller, serves hardly any purpose except at the very end. Her scenes throughout the movie feel like a waste and unnecessary. Additionally, the scene where Morty, George Harris, goes nuts and beats up his former partner in a coffee shop and is forced to go into hiding feels kind of awkward and serves as a weak attempt at throwing a monkey wrench into Craig's character's plans. However, these problems hardly hurt the film. The movie is engaging, fun to watch, and paced very well. It never gets boring and you are always kept wondering what is going to happen next. The relationship between Craig's and Meaney's characters is particularly interesting. Maybe it's the chemistry between the two actors, but had it been a movie with just the two characters interacting with each other, it would have made for just as interesting a film. Daniel Craig is outstanding in this movie. He plays the lead role very well. You know that he's not a good guy in terms of being an upstanding citizen, but as drug dealers go, he's not that bad. He does a great job at presenting his character's rationale for acting the way he does. Even though Craig's character is considered one of the best at what he does, he toes the line so well that it doesn't come across as arrogant. He approached the character in a way that wasn't abrasive to the audience. Someone else may have been cockier or jerkish, but Craig enabled his character to be likable while doing something that isn't generally socially acceptable. Matthew Vaughn set forth to make a slick-looking movie about the drug underworld and pulled it off successfully with Layer Cake. It's not perfect, but it is still an excellent movie. Despite it trying to be very hip, it doesn't take itself too seriously and tells the story in a very entertaining way. This movie should be watched by anyone who is a fan of British films, crime dramas, or good films in general. This post was originally published on the site on March 6, 2010. The original review is intact with some minor grammatical changes and film stills were added for this revision. Matthew Vaughn's Layer Cake is a stylistic exercise applied to deeply traditional material, which is just fine as long as the style is fun to watch, and in this case it is. Surely the need is not urgent for another crime drama about gangsters who dream of getting out of the business, but Layer Cake is only half about its story and spends the other half on its approach. In structure, it recalls films like Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas in how it explores the nuts and bolts of a criminal enterprise, but that film had a scope and attitude that elevated it above the standard. Layer Cake, on the other hand, is sometimes a little detached, a little small in scale, intentionally so, and a little grounded. Perhaps that's for the best, since at film's open we are escorted through a labyrinth of drug operations by the narration Mr. XXX, Daniel Craig, who extols the values of several golden rules, one of them being, simply, never be too greedy. Mr. XXX, we never his real name, is a middleman for an English drug organization, and he's a smooth and sophisticated customer. He's a working-class bloke who likes nice suits and tidiness, and generally holds himself above his own co-workers. He is correct in that he is smarter than the lot of them, but incorrect in his assumption that intelligence will shield him from any danger. During the early passages of Layer Cake, he explains his job with a sense of integrity and instruction that is recognizably British, and yet also shares some similarities with another Scorsese film, Casino, which is about another businessman who is conversational and informative, yet has overestimated his intelligence by a few fatal degrees. I realize that all these comparisons to Scorsese might be a little unfair, but I think when any crime drama puts the Stones' Gimme Shelter on the soundtrack, I think it is purposefully inviting the comparison. Mr. XXX is the kind of chap who thinks that no matter what your line of work is, if you can talk smartly and can make everyone happy, then trouble will never follow you home. He knows that violence exists in organized crime, but he hasn't developed a taste for it, doesn't want to, and tries to minimize its appearance in his own little pocket of the organization. That this places him off balance when the bloody mechanics of the plot kick in is perhaps inevitable, but it's made palatable by Craig's performance, full of the thuggish class that made him such a perfect pick for James Bond. And also by the group dynamics that gradually shift when Mr. XXX is forced to get his hands dirty. The film's supporting cast is a veritable roll call of colorful English character actors, Colm Meaney, Tom Hardy, George Harris, and the invaluable Michael Gambon, who seem at home on the streets and yet bring in near imperceptible baggage from previous roles you half remember seeing them in. The plot, which involves a botched drug deal involving pharmaceuticals, Serbian gangsters, and lots of double crosses, is your pretty standard list of crime film ingredients, and even the central fact we learn about Mr. XXX, that he plans to get out of the business when the time is right, is hardly fresh. We can hardly hear it articulated without giving hearty chuckles. What I wish to discuss is the film's style, and for once, I am not referring to its level of crudity, its editing tricks, or look-at-me shot choices. Instead, Vaughn's film is more subtle and insidious, using a cool command of film language to sound precisely the right notes. This is the kind of film that you can't just listen to, you have to watch it, and I feel like every film should be like that, really. Geography is a unifying factor in Vaughn's style. Unlike many other directors who flourish in an era where computers can cut every microsecond, Vaughn slows down and allows us to drink in the specifics. He enjoys establishing the details that separate rock shops, warehouses, palatial country clubs where men like Jimmy Price, Kenneth Cranham, X's supplier, hold court, and the scummy drug den where an OD victim crucial to the plot is found. Vaughn's camera emphasizes control, going crazy only during scenes that show characters losing said control. Then, tellingly, he regains composure, which is a nice little device that keeps us from getting numb. After one brutal confrontation in a coffee shop, two surviving characters emerge into the street as the camera does a 360 around them. That kind of move is a standard issue indulgence, but then the film contrasts it with the following antiseptic shot of two men going in opposite directions. The film's moments of violence are made more powerful by the way the film seems to treat them as shocking intrusions on the more static material, which perfectly complements the personality of Mr. XXX. A lot of directors these days seem torn between visuals that show off, and ones that tell the story. Vaughn's visuals do both. One early scene features a trip to the pharmacy for Mr. XXX, and as he talks over the soundtrack about how drug companies would distribute all narcotics if not for the legal issues, rows and rows of generic bottles labeled ecstasy and cocaine slowly morph into Listerine and Advil. Cute, yes, but also with a purpose, as it reinforces the blasé attitude that Mr. XXX has towards the distribution of illegal drugs, a worldview that is threatened when he starts discovering dead bodies, some due to the realities of addiction, others from the realities of being involved in the drug trade. The film piles on several well-done sequences. A trip to a nightclub introduces Mr. XXX to Tammy, Sienna Miller, a sexy blonde who has two functions in the plot, with the primary one being that she is a sexy blonde. Yet, you have to enjoy the bravery with which Vaughn dramatizes their meeting. As Mr. XXX stares at her writhing figure on the floor, the camera stays on him for at least half a minute, backing away to reveal Tammy's slimy boyfriend Sydney, Ben Wishaw, shouting in X's ear about things he can't even pretend to feign interest in. In one really nifty scene towards the end of the movie, Craig sits in the office of a high-level kingpin while, in the background, unnoticed, a window shows a drug deal on a warehouse floor that ends in a way that he, for once, did not anticipate. What keeps Layer Cake from greatness is its coldness, which extends from its flippant dialogue all the way to the precocious detail of where we never learn our main character's name. Vaughn got his start under the auspices of director Guy Ritchie, Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and you see some of the same techniques used here in its depictions of the criminal underworld, as well as one's reary purpose from Ritchie's main inspiration, Quentin Tarantino. But Ritchie and Tarantino mine similar material for comedy, while Ritchie, left to his own devices, pretty much plays it straight. The distinction is welcome, but I think Ritchie misses his angle of attack. The film needs more, something. More heart, more energy, more uplift, I dunno, something. Instead, we get a five-fingered exercise with a nasty trick ending, one that practically dares us to believe we just wasted our time with a shaggy dog story. I don't think we did, but, still, it's a smug way to close. Movies like Layer Cake function primarily as calling card movies, where the whole point is not to deliver a gripping narrative, but to announce the arrival of a new talent. Much like the horror genre, crime dramas attract two types of crowds. The ones that love the genre and will see anything in it, and the ones who care not one way or the other, but are happy to see what new blood will do with shop-worn material. These films may have familiar faces, but in reality their directors are the stars, because they have accepted the challenge to find a fresh take on things we've seen a million times. Vaughn, for the most part, succeeds ably here, and if Layer Cake is an attempt by an artist to get his name out there and move on to bigger things, perhaps we should reflect that Vaughn has done so, quite capably. Vaughn's career has taken curious turns since Layer Cake. He was signed to direct the third X-Men film and then left the project under a cloud that looked suspiciously like the makings of studio interference. And then he mounted the charming fantasy comedy Stardust, which is pretty far removed from the gritty urban decay of Layer Cake, I must say. Then he made a marriage of crime drama and superhero fantasy with Kick-Ass, which was more thoughtful and less arch than it could have been, and now he has finally wound his way back to the X-Men. His new film, X-Men: First Class, arrived in theaters on Friday. Daniel Craig plays a successful cocaine dealer living in the suave area of London and planning an early retirement from the game. However, on the eve of his get-out he is given what seems a simple enough job: track down the estranged daughter of drug king Eddie Temple, Gambon. While on the job, he and his crew get dragged into a manhunt after being linked to small-time gangster Duke Foreman, who has stolen millions of pounds worth of ecstasy off Serbian drug lords who are on their way to London for their heads. This is an excellent story by J.J. Connolly that stretches far past my plot description, and is perhaps one of the best I've ever seen in a crime film. It is worth noting that not only did Connolly write the book this is based on, but wrote the screenplay for the movie too, and it definitely shows. This is a film filled with twists, turns and subplots that would rival many dramas that grace Hollywood screens in this day. As you would expect, this film is strewn with stereotypical British characters, however these characters feel a lot less stereotypical than usual. This can be seen both ways. Some would argue that going away from the usual British Cockney makes for a more universally believable story, and that book was probably written without the British movie stereotype in mind. However, I think that it's that renowned London slang that sells movies like this, and if Layer Cake could have had some of that magic along with the compelling story, then this could have been huge. This role for Daniel Craig is not that far away from his current career as James Bond, albeit this character is perhaps less aggressive but more threatening. He's a very good lead in this film, delivering a performance not unlike his 007 films. The only thing wrong with him here is that he's not the slightest bit threatening. That might be down to the character who is not violent and keeps himself out of criminal activity, but there are points where it feels like he should be even slightly scary and he isn't. Colm Meaney is an actor I have huge respect for, and he is very cool and clever in this film, showing his experience alongside George Harris. For someone born in London, Tom Hardy's accent seemed completely off in this film. His voice was just uncomfortable, like an American trying but not really believing in it. His general acting was okay and up to everyone else's standard, but that accent was just weird. The directing by Matthew Vaughn in this film was pretty good. Much of it was fairly common, especially in British crime films, but there was the odd bit here and there that was very imaginative, outside the norm, and that's what catches my eye above anything. Also, the way he shot the action scenes was very clever. Everything from the camera movement to the audio was very well thought of. On that note, I loved the noughties/late 90s soundtrack that accompanied this film. Being born in '94, it reminded me a lot of my childhood. Before seeing this I was a bit apprehensive, with Snatch being my favorite British crime film bar none, I immediately thought this would be stuck in its shadow. However, Layer Cake hasn't tried to be the crime comedy that Snatch was, but has gone down a much more serious, plot-based route, and by God has it worked. I was really drawn into the story, much down to the work by J.J. Connolly and Matthew Vaughn. The characters could have maybe been a bit more interesting in their own right, and the argument's still out over the whole stereotypical Brit and whether it would have worked, but even without that this is definitely the most intelligent British crime film I've ever seen, and is definitely worth a look even if you're not a fan of the style. Slinging drugs like cocaine, or Charlie in the parlance of British slang, is just a business enterprise for the unnamed protagonist of Layer Cake, played with suave Elon by Daniel Craig. He doesn't like to get his hands dirty with all that criminal monkey business, and so his insulation includes Morty, George Harris, a right-hand man with crime firm connections who isn't afraid of a little wet work, his in-house chemist Clarky, Tom Hardy, and general-purpose muscle Terry, Tamer Hassan. The kilos are prepped, they flow out the door, the cash comes back, and our protagonist pays it up the bad guy food chain to Big Boss Jimmy, Kenneth Cranham, through his consigliere Jean, Colm Meaney. With his stash of laundered money and smug detachment, XXXX is preparing his escape route from the drug biz when everything suddenly, inevitably goes haywire. A rival crew, a considerably less suave one run by the Duke, a bug-eyed Jamie Foreman, and his girlfriend slasher, Sally Hawkins, channeling a street-level Melanie C of the Spice Girls, ropes XXXX into some dangerous business with a bulk shipment of contraband ecstasy and the Serbian militiamen the Duke jacked it from. Jean and Jimmy aren't happy, the Duke and his firm are in hiding, and bodies are starting to pile up. Add to that Eddie, Michael Gambon, a mysterious, very tan rich guy playing his own long game, and alluring femme fatale Tammy, Sienna Miller, and the protagonist's plan for a smooth, clean exit suddenly feels like a foolish dream from just a few days prior. Layer Cake's take on the cheeky brick crime caper has its share of gangland slang, its handful of different crime crews peppering their speech with references to skint, causers, and bunts. But unlike those Ritchie films, its characters don't feel like outsized animations or placeholder caricatures. It brings to mind another British crime film on the quieter side, Roger Donaldson's The Bank Job, 2008, with a standout performance from Jason Statham in a heist movie based on the 1971 Baker Street robbery in London. As Morty, George Harris keeps his large frame composed and expressive eyes full of wary, watchful menace as he drives around London with XXXX in his Audi Quattro wagon, looking for a way out of their predicament. And when an old rival resurfaces, Monty becomes something quite less than composed in a brilliant beat-down sequence set to Duran Duran's Ordinary World. Fittingly for a film adapted from a novel, Layer Cake opens with an extended monologue from our nameless dealer, who espouses on the method and practice of the drug game. It's a thriving modern business that sells an in-demand product, but one with a finite end, too, once the government sorts out legalization. But this is now, he tells us in voiceover. So while prohibition lasts, make hay while the sun shines. I'm not a gangster. I'm a businessman whose commodity happens to be cocaine. I mean, 10 years ago, a bit of Charlie was for pop stars or a celebrity's birthday bash. It was demonized by Daily Mail readers getting drunk in naff wine bars. Now they're my biggest clients. With its raft of inventive camera and editing work, sweeping pans between people and locations, observing a conversation from beneath a glass coffee table, and a brutal beating that takes the point of view of the bloke getting mashed, Layer Cake consistently enlivens its proceedings, which otherwise most often feature one group of bad people arguing with their opposite number. It's also compelling that those arguments are full of naturalism between the ensembles. These guys are friends, comrades in grift. It follows that any result of their actions would be entirely selfish. We're enveloped in the crime game from the start of Layer Cake. Regular squares living the straight life don't figure into it. With its little criminal world sufficiently built, Layer Cake sets about tidily destroying it. The Serbs are particularly nasty in the way they dispatch rivals, and it's fun to watch Craig shuttle through fretting, protestations, assurances, and finally steely determination as XXXX's layers of insulation are steadily ripped up. The supporting cast is full of fine early career performances, including those of Hawkins, Hardy, Miller, and in particular Bern Gorman, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, as a loudmouth low-level gangster named Gaza. It's also clear from Craig's work here how keen the Bond brain trust must have been on casting him as 007. He's poised, charming, quick with the right words for the job, and looks damn good in a suit. Layer Cake is such a satisfying watch. It's curious that the adaptation of Connolly's follow-up novel Viva la Madness apparently never got off the ground, even though Statham was once slated to take over the protagonist's role from Craig. Stream it. Daniel Craig is cool and compelling as the protagonist who just might be too smart for his own good, and Layer Cake's tight plotting piles on the increasingly dicey crime film conventions with aplomb. Anyone familiar with Guy Ritchie's Guns and Geezers films can have a reasonably good idea of what to expect from Matthew Vaughn's debut offering, Layer Cake. Adapted by J. Connolly from his own novel of the same name, the film stars Daniel Craig as a successful cocaine dealer, intent on tying up loose ends and quitting while he's ahead. Only, there's one last job, isn't there always? While it can't escape its kinship with the likes of Snatch and Lockstock, Vaughn applies a glossier finish to his film, which is rubber-stamped by the casting of a smooth-talking Daniel Craig in the central role. This is a pre-Bond Craig, although it could easily be viewed as the audition that landed him the iconic 007 role. Although his character is guilty of serious crimes, he is a loosefit in the criminal world, preferring to deal with his customers at arm's length while his operation runs efficiently under the radar. Just as he's getting ready to pack up and call it a day, trouble comes knocking in the form of mob boss, Jimmy, Kenneth Cranham. What is refreshing about Craig's character and the underlying narrative of the piece is that this isn't a gangster film about someone pursuing greed. This is about someone recognizing the pitfalls of the lifestyle and trying his best to divorce himself from it, only it won't let him. On paper, it sounds like a recipe right for comedy to thrive, although Vaughn never opts to go down that road, keeping his film edgy and focused ahead. The supporting performances are a range of colorful stereotypes and familiar faces. Jamie Foreman, Bern Gorman and Sally Hawkins play a ragtag trio of drug dealers, clearly heading for disaster on one level or another, while Michael Gambon brings a little godfathery weight to proceedings. As with Vaughn's subsequent work on Kick-Ass, the soundtrack choices play a significant role. The Rolling Stones' Gimme Shelter will add a certain vivum to any seduction scene, while Duran Duran's Ordinary World and the Cult She Sells Sanctuary are also given generous airtime. In a sense, using such instantly recognizable music is employing the exact same method of impact through music that your average Manhattan set chick flick aims for. Amid graphic shows of violence, sex appeal, and mountains of drugs and cash, this isn't a film that is in any way trying to glamorize the world it depicts. The contrary, its message is loud and clear: the personal, physical, and psychological cost of being involved in organized crime vastly outweighs the dubious financial gains. With that, Layer Cake is yet another confidently made British gangster film. The problem with this film is, it's largely forgettable, given the reliance on supposedly shocking twists. This lack of impact, just a couple of days after watching them unfold, is a damning critique. The main interest is probably watching the next 007, Craig, before he had the role, and his urbane, suave drug dealer is not a bad fit for Bond, perhaps closer to Fleming's original than the movie icon he has become, especially around his cold, near-dead eyes. Much like The Bride in Kill Bill, Volume 1, he's given no name, an interesting conceit, though Vaughn doesn't go to the show-off depths of bleeping it out, it's just never used. Reducing the film to its central element, he has to track down 1 million stolen ecstasy tablets, before the previous owner's Serb assassin tracks him down. This has received glowing reviews elsewhere, but I can only presume those critics have not seen better examples of the British gangster flick, like Get Carter or The Long Kiss Goodnight. To Vaughn's credit, he does take it seriously, and avoids aping Guy Ritchie, whose movies were more comedies in a gangster setting. There are also some moments that are either effective or sharp. However, the further this goes on, the more it seems to unravel. In the end, the movie has so many balls in the air that fumbling is inevitable. Never actually collapsing, the creaking from the story is still audible before the end, and you may wake up next morning, thinking, hang on, well, better than anything Ritchie has done since meeting Madonna. That's probably not saying much, given she's done for his career what Yoko Ono did for the Beatles. A little less plot here would probably have been a big help. I don't think anyone is going to accuse Layer Cake of not having enough energy. From the actors to the editing, this is a film that makes you want to get up from your seat and maybe go do something productive for a while. Well, more productive than watching Layer Cake ultimately is, as in the end, this isn't a film that has much more going for it other than its sleek style and pronounced energy. Our star is Daniel Craig, playing a character called XXXX in the credits. This no-name man is a businessman, or so he believes, whose commodity happens to be drugs. To be specific, he deals in cocaine. For the first 5 or so minutes of the film, he explains to us how there are rules to his operation, how he must always remain focused on the task at hand, how you must always pay your supply on time, and how, at some point, he wants to get out of the illegal business for good. He plans on retiring soon, although he is first going to get involved in something that will require the breaking of some of his already established rules. XXXX is called in by his supplied, Jimmy, Kenneth Cranham, and is told that it's time for him to pay up on a favor. Jimmy's associate, Eddie, Michael Gambon, has had his daughter go missing after she became addicted to the very substance that XXXX cuts and distributes. Obviously, she must be found, so that's the gist of the favor: find this woman. The details don't matter just as long as she's found. Meanwhile, some stolen ecstasy tablets are currently in the planning stage of ecstasy distribution. How does one sell 1 million tablets without the original owner finding out? Anyway, XXXX gets involved in this plot as well. One thing eventually leads to another, the plots are crossed, twists are taken, and eventually pretty much everyone wants to kill everyone else. Many people die, friends are lost, and it all becomes pretty clear to XXXX he's not going to be retiring anytime soon. There's more going on than I've described, but that would be too much explanation and also giving too many things away. There are more than a few subplots in this film, and they help keep things fresh, even if there are a lot of down points in the action. While the actors and filmmakers clearly wanted a manic pace to be kept throughout, the script didn't exactly allow for this. There are a couple of long stretches when XXXX just walks around to different areas and then talk with people. Meanwhile, the filming style and editing choices want to make this seem like the most crazy thing to ever be shown on film. This is a problem because the film never lets up. I'm okay with stretches of exposition and character building, but when the film doesn't present them in a way that we would normally recognize them, it's both jarring and unsettling. Layer Cake wants us to think that every scene is so action-packed, but in reality, that's only true for maybe 50% of the time it's playing. A consistent filming and editing style is nice, but it doesn't play well to the dialogue exchanges. If I had to give a reason not to watch this film, it would be because of this. Audiences want a break from constant action, and when your screenplay gives you these breaks, they need to be taken advantage of. There is ultimately too much going on as well, which leads to a sensory overload. If you're unfamiliar with how these films generally work, you might find yourself struggling to remember everything that's happening, who's double-crossing whom, why this character is acting this way instead of that way, and so on. There is a lot to keep track of with Layer Cake, which does benefit it on repeat viewings, even if it will turn away some viewers. For instance, there's an attempted love story which didn't quite work out, as well as some attempted backstory given to one of XXXX's cronies. It might have been beneficial to excise these parts from the film. Once the action does get going, it's quite entertaining and the filmmakers seem to understand how to film that much better than the slower moments. This becomes a genuinely thrilling film once shootouts or chase scenes begin. The highlight for me was either our introduction to Michael Gambon's character, or a sniper battle, if you can call it that, involving a hitman, XXXX, and a character we never actually get to see. The actors are all effective, in particular Daniel Craig in the lead role. Supporting roles go to Colm Meaney, George Harris, and Tom Hardy as his partners, Sienna Miller as a love interest, Jamie Foreman, Kenneth Cranham, and Michael Gambon as others involved in the drug world, as well as a few others who have lesser roles. You can believe everyone in the part they're given, even if some of them were unnecessary to telling a good story. Layer Cake isn't a bad film, but it did disappoint me. It opens so well, and has such energy that it sets itself up for failure right from the start. The filmmakers didn't know how to switch from action to drama, so their filming style kept with the former, which doesn't lend itself well when characters are just talking to each other. The action is fun and the actors are good, but there is too much going on. The screenplay wasn't as tight as it needed to be. Not bad, but not necessarily all that good either. Played with urbane smoothness by up-and-comer Daniel Craig, Enduring Love, Pic's unnamed narrator hero, called just XXXX in end credits, is a professional middleman between large-volume cocaine and pills importers and various street dealers out of West London. XXXX has managed to squirrel away a tidy nest egg for his planned departure from the biz in a few days' time by following a few common-sense rules, such as not getting high on his own supply, laundering his money safely and not making enemies. But his boss Jimmy Price, Kenneth Cranham, has two final jobs XXXX must do before he can collect his figurative gold watch. First, Price wants the runaway junkie daughter of Kingpin Eddie Temple, Michael Gambon, found and delivered safely to him rather than her father. Second, XXXX must sort out the mess made by the Duke, Jamie Foreman, in fine manic form, who hijacked ecstasy tablets in Amsterdam from Serbian crime lord Dragan Mikanovic. Price wants XXXX to buy the pills from the Duke, but the sorehead Serbs want them back. While the hero begins to suspect he's been sent on a suicide mission, he discovers a reason to live when he falls in lust with Tammy, Sienna Miller, the slinky GF of the Duke's nephew Sidney, Ben Whishaw, on a nightclub dance floor in a luminously lensed sequence that packs a nice slow-mo erotic wallop. By degrees, plot turns into a Chandleresque noir as XXXX's criminal gumshoe works through the complex strands of a backstory that involve not only Price and Temple but also his trusted co-workers Morty, George Harris, and Jean, Colm Meaney, and their complex alliances and grudges. Slightly clumsy flashbacks to the 1970s risk creating AUD confusion with unnecessary details, and slow the train down just when it should be picking up speed. Pic's title refers to a speech in which one character compares the hierarchical criminal society to a tiered cake. Strong echoes are felt in both Pic's plot and texture from Brian De Palma's Carlito's Way, Paul Schrader's Light Sleeper, and that ever-present touchstone of British crime thrillers, Mike Hodges' Get Carter. But Vaughn and screenwriter J.J. Connolly, also making his film debut here with this impressively pared-down adaptation of his own novel, bring sufficient freshness to the dialogue and are sparing enough with the references so that Pic never feels like a collage of obvious movie allusions, unlike Ritchie's work at its worst. There's a proper lived-in believability about Layer Cake's depiction of how the worlds of the rich, the criminal and the criminally rich intersect. Fine supporting turns in well-written roles make this a meaty pie. Harris's Mellow Morty, at first an apparent channeling of Danny Glover in a stereotypical black sidekick role, spectacularly upends expectations with a burst of violence. Gambon finds yet another way to project oleaginous bad guy menace. Underwritten roles give femme thesps less to work with, although Sally Hawkins pumps her part as the Duke's killer queen slasher. In the end, however, it's very much Daniel Craig's movie. An actor every bit as capable as current British flavour of the season Jude Law, but handsome in a rougher, more broken-nosed way, Craig's range and dapper appearance here may finally help him break out as a star stateside. Tech package is pro, with kudos due in particular to Cave Quinn's well-observed production design. Matthew Vaughn produced Guy Ritchie's Mockney villain Adventures of Yore, and now he's directed one of his own, taking us on the most unwelcome trip down memory lane imaginable. It's back to the grim late 90s era of movies like Rancid Aluminium and Final Cut, that uncool Britannia epic when terrible break gangster films got made by the metric ton. This is another flashy, empty tale of rada gangsters and lambda geezers, all lack of style and no substance. Michael Gambon phones in a Mr. Big routine and it's got Jamie Foreman playing a voice rises to shout, right Muppet. Our hero is Daniel Craig, a super cool drug dealer who sashays about like some sort of Armani catwalk model, often treating us to a brooding voiceover about the reality of the drug scene. I'm not a gangster. I'm a businessman, etc. Soon he is out of his depth in a situation for which possible adjectives include Larry, moody and tasty. Jonathan Glazer's Sexy Beast and Paul McGuigan's Gangster No. 1 showed how Brit noir can still be done. This fatuous, naive and boring film does the opposite. In the late 1990s through the first decade of the 21st century, several so-called British gangland thrillers were released to varying degrees of success. Filling a creative void left by the absence of American crime dramas, mafia films like The Godfather and Goodfellas had long since passed. These films were known for their dynamic and offbeat characters and sudden and shocking use of violence. Shades of both Tarantino and Coen brothers' influence are clear, with features that were sure to please fans of films like Reservoir Dogs, 1992, and Blood Simple, 1984. Many A-list actors from the UK saw their breakout roles in one of these films, with many more getting their feet wet with smaller, supporting roles. These films also helped launch the careers of several well-noted British directors, among the most notable of them being Guy Ritchie, Snatch, and Matthew Vaughn. Among his contemporaries, Vaughn has done the most selective work over the past 15 years, choosing often to stick with projects that fit his signature style. It's easy to look at the Kingsman films and see traces of those gangland-style crime thrillers. Taking a breath, Vaughn invites his collaborator to speak. John, any comments? And Connolly, sounding like he's seated way back across the room from Vaughn's mic, agrees. It's just a really good kind of thumbnail sketch of like the last 4 years of criminality, especially as the piece sets up the relationship among drugs, crime, and money. Vaughn adds that the voiceover was particularly dicey to perfect, as Mr. Craig did not like being put in the studio and being asked to just say lines. Mr. Craig, it appears, wanted motivation and context. And so, Vaughn says, it took a long time to get it right. A 2004 Q&A at the National Film Theatre in London, which, along with 17 deleted scenes and a couple of alternative endings, forms the DVD's hefty-seeming extras package, shows star and director sitting at opposite ends of a table, agreeing on the film's excellence. XXXX introduces himself with a bit of a tour through his current circumstances. As the camera darts and swoops, you see he's managing a fairly large, efficient, and profitable organization. I only deal in kilos, he asserts. His narration is terse and snappy, the underlying image is smart and aggressive, full of quick pans and smash-up editing, in the manner of, say, Snatch or Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, both produced by Vaughn, whose self-presentation at the National Film Theatre suggests he had to say once too often what it was like to make this transition. To set his own context, XXXX determines that an earlier moment in crime was less stressful. When I was born, he reminisces/fantasizes, the world was a far simpler place. It was all about cops and robbers. Probably less true than he thinks, but according to his movie's seductively slick surface, today's corruption is more complicated, harrowing, and alluring. Adapted by Connolly from his novel, Layer Cake exposes the complications of this grey world, or rather, the layers, the intersections of good and bad, legal and illegal, addicted and audacious, the ways that crime is at the base of everything that appears legit. To get along, he keeps to his rules, never get too greedy, know and respect your enemies, the law is stupid, that sort of thing. Despite this understanding, XXXX believes that his far end of the crime continuum is too risky. He's seen some ugly violence, he deals with exceedingly violent men, and well, it just might be a good idea to move on while still virginal in this respect. Barring fuck-ups, he asserts, I'm leaving it all behind. Of course, there will be fuck-ups. The film, following formula, gives XXXX a few good reasons to seek a career that's at least slightly more legit, aside from general principle. He has an exceedingly snooty and unimaginative employer, Jimmy, Kenneth Cranham, a new assignment, to locate and return the crackhead daughter of Jimmy's own boss, Eddie Temple, Michael Gambon, and briefly noted relationship in development with Tammy, Sienna Miller. The fact that she's currently running with one of XXXX's associates, a young pasty punk, suggests that maybe she's seeking another life as well, or maybe she's just shallow, or, as Miller suggests in the making of documentary, she's tardy. Eddie is a monster, as a tape reveals, he's a racist as well as a sexist and murderer. I don't think anybody gives a fuck about spades shooting spades, he says, as the camera pans faces of stunned associates. Fortunately, XXXX pals around with a couple of hardcore sorts, Gene, Colm Meaney, who figures all angles, and Morty, George Harris, who's served hard time and has no compunctions concerning brutal retaliation or preemption. XXXX calls him my bridge to the criminal world. While Gene demonstrates his ferocity on XXXX's face, following what turns out to be a minor betrayal, Morty occasions the film's stop-the-show piece, when he loses his mind with an ex-prison mate, and takes after him with a teapot. A second scene, in which Morty lets loose on XXX, makes a similar point. Violence is language for them, a means to communicate, to be heard, to feel identified. This, says Vaughn while watching Morty knock XXX all over a room, is where it all becomes horrible for X, and it was a really tough scene to film. As the film interrogates the art and costs of violence as a business, Gene and Morty embody its most provocative dilemmas, at once charming, alarming, and hulking menaces. Once he decides he wants out, XXXX's trajectory is pretty much set. He has to work his way through two plots first, the recovery of the daughter and the sale of 1 million ecstasy tablets, possession of which is contested by another dealer, an overtly deranged bloke called the Duke, Jamie Foreman, accompanied by a tetchy girlfriend, slasher, Sally Hawkins, who favors jumpsuits and automatic weapons. The sheer volume embodied by this crassly criminal couple makes XXXX look even more suave by comparison, as he seems almost to cringe when they start yawking and stomping. At the same time, his coupling with the more conventionally showy Tammy suggests a kind of parallel more than a complete divergence. He might think he's headed somewhere else, but he's only digging more deeply into the muck that generates characters like the Duke. Craig raises the stakes considerably. He ensures that you see XXXX's mind wheels turning as he confronts each new impasse, and this is indeed a special talent, to make such process so delicately visible, and when he does take up the kind of face-to-face violence he's tried so hard to avoid, partly out of rage and partly to survive, he looks genuinely pained. He's not so cool as he thinks, and that's what makes him different, even amid the sameness all around him. On the verge of walking away from the coke business with a cool million in his pocket, Daniel Craig's super slick dealer finds himself sucked back into a murky world of dodgy Dutch ecstasy, missing ingenues, and psychopathic Serbian hitmen. Connoisseurs of the Brit flick crime caper will note that Layer Cake was initially slated for Guy Ritchie before being helmed by one-time collaborator Matthew Vaughn, and there is no avoiding the fact that the blend of violence, anarchy, and keystone comedy is reminiscent of Lock, Stock, and Snatch. There are worse complaints, however, and Vaughn contrives a stylish, brutal thriller. He is well served by a cast that includes Craig, Michael Gambon, and Colm Meaney, but the trouble with Layer Cake is its hero's motivation. All the characters are criminals, although some are more prone to double-crossing than others, and it soon becomes apparent that the audience is supposed to root for a money-obsessed criminal on the basis that he's cooler than the other crooks. Which is boring. Layer Cake is a strong British crime film. Seen once. The 8 rating is honest evaluation. Matthew Vaughn's directorial debut after producing Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Snatch. Daniel Craig in the lead role that got him the James Bond job. Adapted from J.J. Connolly's novel. Set in the London cocaine business at the executive level instead of the street level. The unnamed protagonist, Craig, is a London cocaine distributor about to retire. He has worked at the wholesale level for years without arrest. He has money. He has discipline. He has a plan to exit clean. Eddie Temple, Michael Gambon, is the senior figure who will need to sign off on the retirement. Temple hands him 2 final jobs. First job, find Charlie, the strung-out daughter of Temple's friend Eddie Ryder. Second job, buy 1 million ecstasy pills from the Duke, a Liverpool dealer who happens to have them and needs out fast. Both jobs go wrong. The ecstasy turns out to have been stolen from a Serbian gang. The Serbs want the pills back or someone dies. Charlie is harder to find than expected. Multiple gangs converge. The protagonist's careful retirement plan dissolves under the pressure of 2 assignments that were never the simple favors Temple presented them as. Craig plays the protagonist as an intelligent man operating in business surrounded by dangerous men. He thinks before he speaks. He calculates angles. He understands that the work is dirty and has made peace with it because he plans to leave. The character is a businessman first and a criminal second. The performance is what got Craig the James Bond casting. Producer Barbara Broccoli watched Layer Cake when considering Craig for Casino Royale. The Bond comparison is direct. Both characters operate through restraint, calculation, and physical capability when restraint and calculation fail. Layer Cake is Craig auditioning without knowing he was auditioning. The protagonist has no name in the film. Connolly's novel called him XXXX. Vaughn drops the name entirely. The choice supports the performance. Craig is playing a position more than a person. He is the type of man who runs this kind of business. The lack of name keeps him generic enough to be a type and specific enough to be the protagonist. The protagonist narrates the film in voiceover throughout. The voiceover is the film's structural achievement. The protagonist explains the cocaine business with the patience of a man explaining his job to someone who has not done it. The London criminal Layer Cake is described as he describes it. The customers, the wholesalers, the importers, the suppliers. Each layer with its own rules and its own protections. The voiceover technique works because the protagonist is intelligent enough to be worth listening to. He is not Henry Hill telling stories about exciting times. He is a managerial-level criminal explaining how the business actually functions. The audience receives an education in cocaine distribution while watching a thriller about cocaine distribution going wrong. Layer Cake withholds the protagonist's name throughout the entire film. The source novel called him XXXX. The film drops the name entirely. The choice supports the broader argument about institutional position over personal identity. He is the type of man who runs this kind of business. The specific identity is less important than the functional position. The lesson for writers is that anonymity can be character. If your protagonist's name does not matter to the work the protagonist is doing, the name does not need to appear in your work. The choice creates specific dramatic effects. The audience invests in the character without being able to address him by name. The character becomes the position he occupies instead of the personal history he carries. Layer Cake is one of the cleaner examples of this technique in modern crime cinema. Michael Gambon as Eddie Temple is the upper-level operator. Gambon plays Temple at minimum volume. Temple has been doing this for 30 years. He does not need to raise his voice. He plays golf. He has a daughter. He happens to be at the top of a national criminal enterprise. Gambon makes the casual menace work. Colm Meaney as Gene is the protagonist's enforcer and friend. Meaney plays Gene as a man who likes the work and is good at it. The performance is restrained until it isn't. Gene's late film expansion of violence is one of the cleanest character payoffs in the script. Tom Hardy in an early role as Clarky. Sienna Miller as Tammy. Kenneth Cranham as Jimmy Price. Dexter Fletcher as Cody. George Harris as Morty. Jamie Foreman as Duke. Tamer Hassan as Terry. The ensemble is deep and every supporting performance does specific work. Connolly knew the world he was writing about. The screenplay treats every named character as a real person doing real work in a real business. Layer Cake shows how to write a criminal protagonist who is competent without being likable. The protagonist is not a charming rogue. He is a businessman in a business that involves causing deaths. The film does not ask the audience to root for him morally. The film asks the audience to be interested in whether he survives the situation he is in. The lesson for writers is that competence is enough of a hook to carry a protagonist. If your character is good at their work and the work has stakes, the audience will watch. Likability is optional. Credibility is not. Matthew Vaughn directed Layer Cake after producing 2 Guy Ritchie films. The style is recognizably descended from the Ritchie style. Kinetic editing. Voiceover. Stylish violence. Multiple plotlines converging through unlikely coincidence. The difference is that Vaughn takes the material more seriously than Ritchie typically did. Ritchie's London crime films play the gangsters as comic characters in a violent caper. Vaughn plays the gangsters as actual professionals doing actual business. The tone is closer to a financial thriller than to a heist comedy. The shift in tone is what distinguishes Layer Cake from its obvious influences. Vaughn went on to direct Stardust, Kick-Ass, Kingsman, and various other productions. The career has been commercial. Layer Cake remains his best film. The combination of source material, casting, and tonal discipline has not recurred. Vaughn became a hit-making director instead of the serious crime filmmaker Layer Cake suggested he might be. Layer Cake's ending punishes the protagonist for the one variable he failed to manage. He executed every business decision correctly. He earned the respect of every senior figure in the operation. He prepared his retirement carefully. He overlooked one peripheral character whose grievance fell outside the business he had been managing. The grievance killed him. The lesson for writers is that crime drama works better when the ending costs the protagonist through plausible institutional logic instead of through conventional moral punishment. Most crime films punish their protagonists because the conventional moral structure requires punishment. Layer Cake punishes its protagonist because the protagonist genuinely missed something he should have seen. The ending is dramatic justice instead of moral imposition. The technique requires the writer to engineer a specific oversight that the protagonist could plausibly have committed without becoming stupid. Layer Cake manages the engineering at substantial discipline. The protagonist solves his problems. He recovers Charlie. He resolves the Serbian situation. He kills the appropriate enemies. He prepares to walk away from the business clean with his accumulated money. He has done everything Temple asked. He has done everything he needed to do for himself. He stands outside the bar where his retirement party is happening and lights a cigarette. Sydney shoots him. Sydney is the boyfriend of Tammy, the woman the protagonist slept with earlier in the film. Sydney is a peripheral character in the film's gangster business. He is not part of any of the operations the protagonist has been managing. He is a civilian with a grievance. The ending is the film's argument. The protagonist managed the business correctly. The professionals he dealt with respected the work. The shot that kills him comes from outside the business. The careful retirement plan failed because he could not control the things he was not paying attention to. The ending is sudden and unfair and earned. Layer Cake operates as a confident first feature for Vaughn. The Craig performance led directly to the James Bond casting. The supporting ensemble is deep. The screenplay treats the cocaine business as actual business. The voiceover educates without lecturing. The ending lands the argument. The film sits in the tradition of British crime cinema between Get Carter and the Guy Ritchie productions. It is more serious than Ritchie and less existential than Carter. The combination is specific to Vaughn's tone at this point in his career. The 8 rating reflects honest evaluation. The film does not reach 9 because the middle act gets tangled in plot mechanics that could have been tightened. The ending lands the argument cleanly enough that the middle issues do not damage the overall achievement. The film is one of the strongest British crime films of the 2000s. An 8. Layer Cake is a strong British crime film. Craig in the role that got him James Bond. Gambon, Meaney, Hardy in early form. Adapted from Connolly's novel. Matthew Vaughn directing his first feature after producing Ritchie. The film belongs in any British crime cinema conversation. Layer Cake starts as we meet the guy, Craig, we never learn his name, who has taken advantage of being a businessman within the drug world. He keeps everything strictly business with a plan to get out of the business with his latest deal completed. When his boss Jimmy Price, Cranham, sends for him to find his daughter Charlie, Lungi, while also working with loose cannon Duke, Foreman, on the latest job. The problem is the Duke has started an international war with his latest attempt to get a score. Can our guy get through all of the troubles and out of the business with his life? Layer Cake enters into the type of film I personally don't enjoy too much, and that is the drug crime world ones. That isn't going to judge whether I think this is a good or bad film. I liked how the usage of drugs was minimal to no existent in the film. The story is filled with twists and turns along the way, which really does keep us guessing as we see where the final outcome of the film will take us. I did find myself enjoy this one and would suggest to people to watch. We never learn the name of this character, but he is our leading man through the story, a smart businessman in the world of drugs. He finds himself stuck doing one last job before trying to get out of the business, but this job leads him into going against all of his business plans. Daniel is good in this leading role, showing he was ready for the next step up. Gene is the second in command to Jimmy, who has always been the middleman between the guy and Jimmy until the two have to work together to clean up the mess. Colm is your always reliable supporting character. Jimmy Price is the supplier that the guy works for. He hires him to find his partner's daughter and deal with the Duke a loose cannon. He is loud and will do anything to make sure he makes extra money. Kenneth is solid as this gangster character who has too much for their own good. Tammy is a mystery girl that comes into the guy's life that seems to have a plan that should be keeping her ahead of anyone else. Sienna is good and bursts onto the big screen with this role. Layer Cake has a big supporting cast that does have a lot of familiar faces and that all become part of the bigger picture, with our leading man, all giving good performance throughout. Matthew shows off all his style in this film, showing how he can handle multiple story branches around the main one going on. Crime, Layer Cake puts our characters in the middle of the drug world where we don't know who to trust. Layer Cake does keep us guessing to what will happen next through the story. Layer Cake keeps nearly all of the settings being what feels like the criminal underworld location, which works out nicely for the film. Special effects, Layer Cake has good effects when needed but only uses them for the occasions needed. Another day, another cool British crime movie to watch. By now I think you've already realized that I'm somewhat of a fan of this weird subgenre. Popularized in the 90s by Guy Ritchie, it's continuing its rise in the new century. Based on a novel and much more serious, Layer Cake is a different kind of British crime movie. It's more immersive and personal than its predecessors and offers an engaging story of a man who wants to get out of the drug game. But, as we all know, that oftentimes proves to be incredibly difficult. The whole movie is designed in such a way that you can fully imagine yourself as our lead character. A lead character who doesn't even have a name. So, we're thrust into this life of crime full of colorful characters making shit pop. Drug deals, kidnappings, murders, and crazy Serbian hitmen all await you in Layer Cake. Since the original novel was published in 2000, I dare to say that the author probably drew inspiration from Nicholas Winding Refn's Pusher. However, all of this is pretty standard issue stuff when it comes to crime thrillers. Of course, I don't need to tell you that the production values, camera work, and all the other technical aspects were on point. The movie enjoys taking the time to fully explain to us what's going on and how we got there. How the drug trade began in England, why a highly educated guy is whipping cocaine, and all the other juicy stuff. The characters are well developed and authentic, making rational decisions. This further pulls you into this crime world. The man we're about to meet is very careful when it comes to his identity. He's one of the biggest drug dealers in London, and yet we do not know his name. He's smart, resourceful, and knows when to get out of the game. However, before he does that, he must complete 2 tasks. He must find a missing beautiful woman and make sure that the drug deal involving the sale of 1 million ecstasy pills goes okay. Layer Cake stars young Daniel Craig before he became James Bond. Actually, it was the role in this movie that convinced the studios that he would be perfect for that role. And we also have another young star here, namely, Tom Hardy. The rest of the cast consists of dependable actors like Colm Meaney, Tamer Hassan, and Michael Gambon. I also must mention Sienna Miller as Tammy, as she played her role pitch perfect. Layer Cake is a movie you need to see at least 2 times. And I'm not saying that just because there are so many cool characters and twists in the movie. I'm saying that because I think only then you would be able to fully appreciate its quality. The way the multi-layered story satisfyingly comes together and how different character arcs reach their full potential. All thanks to that glorious script written by the author of the original novel, J.J. Connolly. Finally, if you're looking for movies like Layer Cake, check out Rock'n'Rolla, The Football Factory, and Sexy Beast. A film about cocaine, directed by Claudia Schiffer's husband, starring Jude Law's current Belle? On paper, this has a void written all over it. Instead, it's a straight-up gangster flick, adapted from J.J. Connolly's superb novel, that doesn't hit a bum note throughout. Daniel Craig plays a rich coke dealer desperate to retire but tangled ever tighter in a plot involving Scouse and Irish mobsters, a heist on a Dutch ecstasy factory, a rampaging Serbian hitman, and a kingpin, Michael Gambon, tracking down his missing daughter, Sienna Miller. Anyone doubting Lock, Stock, producer Matthew Vaughn was up to the director's job will be amazed. He's easily Guy Ritchie's equal, competently wielding pace, humor, setting, photography, and some very flashy editing to create a modern thriller that's 100% free from cliché, irony, and lazy postmodern bullshit. So many recent gangster films have just fiddled about with 60s iconography. Layer Cake creates its own, with a truly brutal ending. Who'd have thought it? Matthew Vaughn, husband of Claudia Schiffer, friend of Madonna and producer of Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and now add not too shabby film director to his CV. When Guy Ritchie bailed on helming the super slick adaptation of J.J. Connolly's crime novel, the news that Vaughn was taking over raised more than a few eyebrows. But it's fair to say that he's pulled it off, crafting a film of immense style and verve that proves him to be as polished a filmmaker as his erstwhile partner. Still, let's not get too carried away. After all, Layer Cake isn't going to change the world. But as a late entry to the bloody canon of British gangster flicks that spread like the clap in the wake of Lock, Stock and Snatch, it's an impressive and worthy addition to the genre. To Vaughn's credit, he's surrounded himself with top-notch collaborators, notably DOP Ben Davis, who reveals a great eye for London compositions day or night. He's helped too, in no small measure, by Connolly's densely plotted script, which may take one convoluted detour too many in its latter stages but is nevertheless smart and fast-paced. Then there's his cast. For so long now, Daniel Craig has been talked about as the next big thing. Here, he finally gets the role that should make him a star, a nameless, cocksure hero who oozes blue-eyed charisma and streetwise swagger. But the supporting cast, including Michael Gambon's Tan Tycoon, Kenneth Cranham's reptilian crime boss, and Colm Meaney's pernicious hood, play their part too. Vaughn also finds room for Lock, Stock stalwart Dexter Fletcher, not to mention Jude Law's current squeeze Sienna Miller. What's more, the debut director shows a sure hand at mixing macho heroics, mucky humor, and bursts of ultra-violence. Witness the bloody and brutal cafe scene where Craig's right-hand man beats the living crap out of an old acquaintance to the sound of Duran Duran's Ordinary World. It's just one of the many smart soundtrack choices that inject the film with added zip and zest. A tasty debut, then, its sharply suited exterior clothing a tough inner confidence. Layer Cake is an absolutely excellent twisty crime thriller with a pre-James Bond Daniel Craig as the main character, who is focused on getting his final few narcotic deals done and pocketing his millions while retiring from the drug game. While he supplies large quantities of illicit substances, he doesn't use them himself, and has used his self-discipline to save up his funds in order to retire early, despite a few nice purchases and good lifestyle. However, a good moneymaker getting out of the game does not sit well with the higher-ups. They wrestle with the idea of letting him go, as their pockets will most certainly take a hit. The bosses decide to give their star dealer 2 tasks to complete before he fades away into seclusion. The jobs include finding a missing runaway daughter of his direct boss Jimmy's, Cranham, Associates, and the second is to supervise a large drug deal acting as broker for 1 million ecstasy pills for sale from a lower-level thug named the Duke, Foreman. Neither situation winds up being exactly as anticipated, and the plot explodes into a game of double crosses and life and death for all those involved. Balancing all the players and succeeding with his missions will be a challenge, however our hero moves steadily forward with his goal of escaping this life of crime. Vaughn masterfully pulls of the many threads of this movie, and was blessed with an excellent screenplay written by the author of the book that the movie is based on. The high-stakes tension is balanced out by a smart crime drama, with many complex characters and realistic performances by the stellar cast. This was Vaughn's first movie as director, and cemented him in my mind as a force to be reckoned with. He has continued his career with continuous works of high quality. This movie remains one of the better crime dramas since the year 2000, and should not be missed. Institutions like the Internet Movie Database could not exist without films being directly or indirectly connected with each other. This characteristic of modern films sometimes results in certain titles being less remembered for their own artistic or commercial value and more for their significance to other films. Layer Cake, a 2004 British crime drama, exemplifies this phenomenon. Initially conceived as another entry in the cool British gangster film genre popularized by Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, Ritchie was initially set to direct this film as well but later handed over the reins to his producer, Vaughn. The plot of the film is based on the book by J.J. Connolly. The unnamed protagonist, played by Daniel Craig, is a mid-level drug dealer who considers himself to be a businessman rather than a gangster. He abhors violence and runs his business with precision and professionalism, filling his bank account sufficiently for him to be only a few deals away from retirement. However, destiny thwarts those plans from 2 directions. His old-style gangster boss Jimmy Price, portrayed by Kenneth Cranham, instructs him to locate the drugged-out runaway daughter of influential businessman Eddie Temple, portrayed by Michael Gambon. While he contemplates how to accomplish this task, another problem arises with Duke, portrayed by Jamie Foreman, his drugged-out business associate who has stolen 1 million ecstasy pills from Slavo, portrayed by Marcel Yers, a former Serb warlord operating in Amsterdam. These pills are the reason why Slavo dispatches his merciless and deadly assassin Dragan, portrayed by Dragan Mikanovic, to London. The inevitable comparisons between this and 2 of Ritchie's films make Layer Cake more ambitious, more conventional, and, in a way, much better, at least compared with the overpraised Snatch. This is attributed to the plot being based on a book and encompassing a broader scope than the East End underworld. This distinction is immediately evident in the opening, where the protagonist's narration places the film's intricate plot within a wider economic, political, and cultural context. The protagonist himself stands out. He consistently refers to himself as a non-gangster, and his accent, aesthetic preferences, and behavior suggest a background of middle-class upbringing and some level of education, rather than a former street child turning to crime to escape poverty. Layer Cake reinforces this portrayal by challenging the protagonist with his older, more seasoned, and more dependable associates, portrayed by reliable character actors like Colm Meaney and Daniel Harris, who hail from lower social strata and employ business methods that the protagonist finds distasteful. The film further explores this theme by placing the protagonist in encounters with individuals who ostensibly belong to the higher echelons of British society, where the distinction between business and crime becomes increasingly blurred. Layer Cake is visually impressive, and Vaughn demonstrates skill as a first-time director. The film's judicious use of limited resources is evident. London, depicted with prestigious nightclubs, modern skyscrapers, and old country clubs, appears more attractive, vibrant, and hip compared to Ritchie's films. While the accompanying music soundtrack can sometimes feel overly trendy, it is less distracting than the entirely unnecessary romantic subplot involving the protagonist's love interest, portrayed by Sienna Miller, a subplot with real-life implications that fueled tabloid interest during production. The film's major flaw seems to lie in its plot and resolution. The complexity of the storyline may require viewers to watch the film multiple times to fully grasp the intricacies. Nevertheless, Layer Cake earned its place in history. An image from the film, later featured on posters, played a pivotal role in Daniel Craig securing the highly coveted position of the next James Bond. Moreover, even viewers disinterested in the James Bond franchise could appreciate Layer Cake as a skillfully crafted, serious, and largely entertaining British gangster film. Michael Vaughn's directorial debut Layer Cake is a very slick, well-shot film, filled with twists, turns and flashbacks showing key scenes as the movie jumps forward. Film uses similar music to Scorsese, including Gimme Shelter, and features the now obligatory face-stamping scene, this time set to an evocative Ordinary World by Duran Duran. Daniel Craig is excellent as usual, playing a posh drug dealer who's had it too good for too long. Suffice to say the plot is a little confusing and lost me at times. Top, old, boys Kenneth Branagh and Michael Gambon, sporting a Costa del Sol-inspired fake tan, use Craig to recover their money. Craig runs a tight crew and preferring to avoid violence in his line of work, but is gradually drawn into a game of stolen pills, murder, double-cross and a gangster's missing daughter. A professional with strict codes and routines, he struggles in the aftermath of committing his first murder. Great casting, particularly Jamie Foreman as unsteady boss the Duke. This is another good example of an author adapting his own book into a screenplay. The dialogue is spot on, never cheesy, a million miles from the pretentious posturing of Vaughn cohort Guy Ritchie's efforts such as Snatch and Lock, Stock. You might be forgiven for thinking that a life of crime looks appealing, but here everyone pretty much gets their comeuppance and glamorization is non-existent. Branagh and Gambon have real presence, both having a lot of fun with their respective roles. Craig owns the screen, effortless cool, how Bond would be if he distributed kilos of cocaine. Direction is so assured on Vaughn's debut here that it's not surprising he was offered Stardust as his next project. The guy can probably pick and choose now. If only he had stayed on board, X3 wouldn't have been anything like the disappointment it was. Very stylish and brutal, Layer Cake is a joy to watch. Criminals are portrayed realistically, never over the top unless their characters demand it. Hilariously manic and well observed, each time the Duke and his bumbling crew were on screen I burst into laughter. For me, Layer Cake echoed the novels of Elmore Leonard in that the central characters become somewhat manipulated and end up playing off against each other. I was also reminded of The Long Good Friday, a confident British gangster movie in which the central character's empire starts to crumble and he doesn't know why. Another film that was more than worth the wait. Again, I had to ask myself why I didn't watch this film when it was first released. Craig's decline from in-control weight mover to manipulated pawn begins as soon as he gets involved with outsiders. Colm Meaney has never been better as a gangster middleman, more involved in the proceedings than initially suspected. Watching a film like this with an ex-City of London policeman was an interesting experience. I don't remember many inconsistencies being pointed out to me, although realism was scrutinized and the film came off well. Sure, it's stylized but very enjoyable. Who cares when it looks this good? Events unfold and subsequent questions are all answered via flashbacks, so the film never loses pace. Gambon lights up every scene he's in. Narratives seem to be popular with the crime movie, but here it's put to good use. De Layer Cake is, zo wordt ons door Michael Gambon rond het een van de film uitgelegd, een representative de sociale orde. In het leven en de misdaadwereld, klim je langzaam naar de bovenste log. Zo ook de naamloos hoofdpersoon gespeeld door de nieuwe James Bond, Daniel Craig. Gedurende de hele film wordt zijn naam niet genoemd en tijdens de aftiteling staat er slechts XXXX. Net als de naam, blijft ook de geschiedenis van deze drugsdealer onbekend, toch legt het Craig eenvoudig om een boeiend en vooral realistisch personage neer te zetten. Overeigen Zeit XXXX sich nicht als Drugstealer, mir als een Zakenman Handel zwaar to valid drugs is. De Reid licht in Honden van Matthew Vaughn en voor hem is het de eerst film om te regisseren. De fans zullen zijn naam echter al kennen als producer van films als Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch. Voor Layer Cake beslut Vaughn niet te hulpen te schakelen van collega Guy Ritchie, maar zelf actor de camera te gaan staan. Natuurlijk gezien vergelijking tussen de stijlen van Vaughn en Ritchie dan op zijn plaats. De synopsis van de film, Gangster met in Lotsklasse, kan not alle kanten op zeker omdat Vaughn direct wordt geassocieerd met de Guy Ritchie films verwacht een komisch en gewelddadig misdaadfilm. Met Layer Cake zien we echter een ander tak binnen het misdaadgenre. De komische elementen zijn achterwege gelatin en darver in de plaats wordt er veel meer aandacht besteed aan de emotionele elementen van het begon van een misdaad. Een ander verschil is dat, ondanks dat er geld in de film zit, de film niet gewelddadig is. Verwacht dus ook geen Tarantino-stil. Het is duidelijk dat Matthew Vaughn niet dezelfde formule hanteert als Ritchie en zonder aanrecht aan te doen aan Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, is het een welcome verandering. Alles klopt verder aan Layer Cake. Een uitstekend cast, een plot dat zorgvuldig naar een climax bouwt, uitstekend personages en een eind waar tegen zegt. Geen Lock, Stock. 3 foot, maar juist een original misdaadfilm en een goed reden om zou Matthew Vaughn als Daniel Craig in de gaten te houden. Layer Cake may be the least intimidating name ever for a crime movie. It conjures images of bridal showers, cooking shows, and birthday parties. It does not necessarily bring to mind thoughts of gangsters, assassins, drug trafficking, and the seamy underbelly of London's criminal underground. Unless you're watching some really awesome cooking show I don't know about. The Layer Cake in question refers to the hierarchy of criminals. This isn't unfamiliar territory for Matthew Vaughn, who produced Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch. This time it's Vaughn sitting in the director's chair and the results are exceptionally entertaining. Layer Cake is a cinematic treat. Daniel Craig, Road to Perdition, plays our untitled lead, referred to in the end credits as XXXX. He's a cocaine dealer but not a gangster by any means. He wants to make his money, not step on any important toes, and then walk away on top and without any gaping holes in his body. Craig is summoned by his boss Jimmy, Kenneth Cranham, and given 2 missions, whether he wants to accept them or not. The first is to relocate the missing daughter of a very powerful friend of Jimmy's. The second, and far more dangerous job, is to secure a package of millions of stolen ecstasy pills and make a profit. Complicating matters is the angry Serbian mob that the pills were stolen from. They've dispatched a deadly assassin known as Dragan to track down their stolen drugs and kill anyone involved. Craig is left to juggle the investigation, find a buyer, stay ahead of Serbian hitmen, get some time in with a hot new girl, and all the while keeping his higher-ups content enough not to kill him themselves. Layer Cake should be the film that makes Craig the star he so rightfully deserves to be. This man is a modern-day Steve McQueen with those piercing blue eyes, cheekbones that could cut glass, and the casual swagger of coolness. Craig grabs the audience from his opening narration as he explains the ins and outs of his business. We may never see Craig sweat, but he still expresses a remarkable slow burn of fear so effectively through those baby blues. He's in over his head and the audience feels his frustrations. In an interesting character twist, when Craig does resort to killing, he's actually tormented and haunted by his actions. As with most British gangster flicks, there are a batch of colorful characters that leave their mark. Dragan Mikanovic, is a wonderfully enigmatic ghost of an assassin always one step ahead of Craig and the audience. Morty, George Harris, and Jean, Colm Meaney, add heart and bluster as Craig's trusted right-hand men. But the actor who steals the whole film with a malevolent glee is Michael Gambon, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. He plays Eddie Temple, the man behind the men behind the scenes. Gambon delivers the harshest of speeches with a velvety pragmatic calm. We don't know what runs deeper with Eddie, his tan or his scheming. Sienna Miller plays the thankless love interest to Craig. She's pretty, sure, but there isn't much acting ability on display in Layer Cake besides some smoldering glances. We never really know what Craig sees in her besides being another cute blonde to choose over. Miller isn't alone in the underwritten character department. Layer Cake is crammed with secondary characters that pop in and out when it's necessary. It's not too annoying, but it does mess around with an audience's ability to follow along coherently. Layer Cake is not one of the slick, whack-a-mole ventures Richie has given us, prima donna. No sir, this is a brooding, serious and nearly terrifying look at the old adage crime doesn't pay. Very few crime-centered films express the day-to-day anxiety of just being a criminal. Jimmy reminds Craig that he'll never be able to walk away because he's too good an earner for his higher-ups. In Layer Cake, you can get killed for being too greedy, being too careless, being too good at your job, and even just being in the wrong place. Eddie sums it up best whilst describing Faust: man sells his soul to the devil. It all ends in tears. These things always do. Vaughn has a polished visual sensibility that doesn't overwhelm the viewer. He keeps the camera fluid and steady with a minimal amount of cuts. A nifty opening scene involves an imaginary drugstore, stocked with pot, cocaine, and the like, melting into a real drugstore, 1-hour photo, impulse items at the register. When the tension does mount, Vaughn knows just how to turn the screws. A late sequence involving a chase between the SWAT team and our batch of criminals had me on the edge of my seat. For a first-time director, Vaughn also has great patience. He doesn't rush his storyline and he doesn't suffocate his movie with visual flourishes. He also has a great deal of faith in his audience's intelligence. This isn't as lively as Snatch or Lock, Stock, but that's because Vaughn's film is also much more serious and dangerous. This is an intricate and gripping film, but it might be a little too complex for its own good. Twists and double crosses are expected in this genre, but writer J.J. Connolly has so many characters running around and so many hidden agendas that it's nearly impossible to keep track. Some of the subplots and backstories add very little, like the inexplicable Crazy Larry flashbacks. I left the theater still confused about plot points but refreshingly satisfied nonetheless. Layer Cake is the most thoroughly exhilarating time I've had at a theater this year. This pulpy daylight noir caper is full of memorable hoods, plenty of twists and turns, and a star-making performance by the steely-eyed wonder that is Daniel Craig, rumored to be the next 007, though in my heart I'll always root for Clive Owen. Fans of Richie's frenetic gangster flicks should be entertained. Anyone looking for a clever and exciting potboiler that treats violence and crime seriously should start lining up immediately. If you're suffering from the cinematic wasteland that 2005 has shaped up to be so far, then have yourself a generous helping of Layer Cake and thank the Brits. This film. Directed by Matthew Vaughn. Screenplay by J.J. Connolly. Based on Layer Cake. Produced by Adam Bohling. Starring Daniel Craig. Cinematography Ben Davis. Edited by John Harris. Music by Lisa Gerard. Production company Marv Films. Distributed by Columbia Pictures. Release date October 1, 2004. Running time 105 minutes. Country United Kingdom. Language English. Budget $6.5 million. Box office $11.9 million.